So, good morning, everyone, and welcome to the meeting of the Children's, Families and Community Select Committee. My name is Brian Long, Chair of the committee, and be very pleased to see you all here today. This is a meeting being held in person at County Hall and is also being streamed live on the County Council's YouTube channel. A fire alarm test is not expected during the meeting, but if it does sound, we must evacuate County Hall, and in the event of emergency, please make your way to the nearest exit and meet at the muster point located out in the main car park. Be a bit of a damp day for that. Let's hope it doesn't happen. So we'll start with receiving, please, apologies for absence and note of any substitutes, please. Megan.
Thank you, Chair. I have apologies today from Councillor John Ward, substituted by Councillor Robert Savage, Councillor Tim Adams, substituted by Councillor Dan Roper, and Councillor Claire Bowes.
Thank you, and thank you those substituting as well. It's always good to see extras filling up our numbers, so thank you for that. Robert and Dan. Minutes of the last meeting held back on the 12th of September. Am I okay to sign those as a true record, please? Thank you. Make sure that's done. Members, any interest to declare on items as presented? Mike.
Thanks, Brian. I do run my own community training provider. Thank you.
You do, yeah. And Councillor Webb, Maxine, please.
I'm going to be discussing, I have a young person who has a EHCP, receives home to school transport and so on. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. No updates, particularly from myself as Chair. I do welcome Richard Kramer as well, who's with us in lieu of one of our independent persons. So welcome, Richard. Good to see you. Thank you for attending. I've not received any public questions, and on this occasion we don't have any local member questions at all. So I'll move on to item 7. Which is the Strategic and Financial Planning 2026 to 27. Councillor Jamieson, as portfolio holder, do you want to introduce your report, please?
Thank you very much indeed, Chair. Good morning to you and good morning, committee members. Nice to see you. Before we begin, I want to acknowledge the recent local child safeguarding practice review published by Surrey Safeguarding Children Partnership regarding the tragic case of Sarah Sharif. This case is a stark reminder of the profound responsibility that we all share to protect vulnerable children. Norfolk County Council and our children's services continually review national developments and the lessons learned from across the country, and we adapt our plans and practices accordingly to ensure that safeguarding remains at the heart of everything that we do. Our commitment is unwavering to keep children safe and to work tirelessly with partners and to ensure that every child in Norfolk can flourish. And therefore, it is vital to recognise why the financial pressures on local government, and particularly on Norfolk, remain so acute. Adult social care and children's services now account for over 2/3 of the Council's total spend. Costs in these areas continue to rise sharply, driven, of course, by demographic change, the complexity of need, and the sustained impact of inflation on care markets. In adult social care, an ageing population means that more residents require higher levels of support for longer. Providers face increasing costs for staff, for energy and accommodation, all of which are passed on to councils. In children's services, demand for placements, special educational needs provision and safeguarding continue to grow. These are not discretionary services. They are statutory duties that reflect our moral and legal responsibility to protect Norfolk's most vulnerable residents. Table 2 on page 36 highlights the significant budget pressures that this council has had to absorb in 25-26, and these were in part driven by high levels of inflation and the national living wage, as well as the impact of changes to the employer's NIC. The 26-27 budget provides growth at a more normal historic level, but the trend in growth is seen in recent years is a huge challenge without the requirement for increased savings targets or the provision of additional funding, which is never forthcoming. But at the same time, those government's funding assumptions for local government effectively presume that Norfolk will increase council tax by the full 4.99% in 26-27, including the adults' social care precept. And this expectation is built directly into national forecasts of local authority spending power, so that when we hear that local authorities have received a 1.1%, for example, increase, real increase in their grants, that assumes the assumption that we will be putting up council tax to the maximum allowed without having a referendum. Council tax, to remind the committee, now accounts for around 55% of the total local authority core spending power. That's up from 47% and up from about 40 when I started doing this job. So there have been recent reports, many highlighting the pressures faced by a number of councils, and those that changed administration 9 months ago, 6 months ago, are finding it, I think, more difficult than they thought to make the savings, or the easy savings, as they said, that were available. These are not there if you are a grown-up running a council, particularly the adult social care and children's services, in a moral way. So in Norfolk, our approach has been different, and through prudent long-term planning and an unwavering commitment to value for money, we've avoided any of the emergency measures that you're seeing elsewhere in the country. We've not had to resort to any short-term cuts to balance the books, and instead we have protected service levels, and we have continued to support vulnerable people, and we continue to invest in Norfolk's future while delivering a balanced budget, a robust budget, and a continued financial sustainability. It's worth looking at table 6 from page 39 of the budget paper, because it illustrates this really clearly. The savings that we're proposing are not reductions in service. They are efficiencies arising from a transformation program. And you might see digital and automation programs in the back office, reducing administrative overheads, or smarter procurement in adult social care, and transport contracts delivering better value without compromising quality. There's also a great deal of service integration and early intervention in children's services, helping families sooner and avoiding the high-cost placements later. And so, I reiterate that the savings that you see listed under the area relevant for your committee are, in the vast majority of cases, are transformation savings. And this is really the point, that this council was on a strategic mission 4 years ago. We put this in place in order that we should try to move the savings that inevitably needed to be made to fill the gap between what we were going to raise in council tax and what was required to balance our books, to move as much of this as possible into the medium-term financial settlement. And we can only do that by having a comprehensive, clear, strategic direction for such services as the ones we're discussing here in children's services. It's only by long-term programs that we can get this done. And the result is that of the £62 million that we would need to save as a council in order to balance our books, some 21 million were already baked in, as they say, into the programme, and the majority of those medium term come from adult social care or from children's services, and I commend senior directors for that. But in spite of all those proposals, we continue to face a substantial gap, and that needs to be addressed in order to enable us to balance the budget. for us to propose to full council in early in the new year. Our current forecast suggests a gap of around 25 million remains to be addressed, as set out on page 44. But that said, our task is made considerably more difficult by ongoing national uncertainty. The government has yet to publish the outcomes of the SEND review or to clarify its implications of the long-promised fair funding review. These omissions make it difficult to plan with confidence for the years ahead. And equally, the late timing of the autumn budget means that key details of local government settlement will not be available until mid-December at best, when the local authority provisional settlement will come through. Probably it'll be the week of the 22nd of December. This delays our ability to model funding scenarios and prepare the balanced budget as required by law. Such late announcements undermine the stability that councils need in order to manage resources effectively. It's a very real thing. It's difficult to deliver services with confidence if you don't know what monies you're getting from central government. The government's anticipated long-term settlement may help, and we await details of that later in the year. But in difficult times, I think that the Norfolk has chosen a responsible path, prudent, it's realistic, it's forward-looking. We're balancing the books without cutting corners. We're protecting the vulnerable and investing in the country's long-term prosperity. And that's not just good finance, it's good government. Thank you, Chair.
Yes, thank you, Andrew. Titus, is there anything you wish to add at this point? No. So I'll move to members of the committee. Questions, comments? I've got Councillor Bambridge, I think, early, and then I've got Councillor Webb. So Leslie first. You caught my eye first. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. It was announced this morning that there's a delay until next year for the SEND report. So I wonder if that's going to affect any particular area in the short term. I know that you're very prudent, and Councillor Jamieson, and hopefully it won't, but there could be some areas that there might be a problem.
Yeah. Thank you, Leslie. I might ask James to respond to that specifically.
Yeah, thank you. So obviously the news that the SEND reforms has been delayed into the new year is significant for the county council. I think that we take a sort of balanced view of that. It clearly is really, really important that government gets these reforms right, and so therefore if there is more time required to engage the sector and finalise something that is going to land well and be sensible, then in a way that is welcome. But equally, it is true that we need this reform to happen urgently, and in terms of the overall sort of financial health of the authority, we need to address and take head on as a nation that the financial challenge, as well as reform a system that isn't working. And I think we've said for quite a long time that although we're doing everything we can in Norfolk, we need that national reform to sort of back up the local action that's being taken. In terms of this paper, I wouldn't say that any of the savings, if you like, that are proposed in here are immediately delayed or impacted specifically just because of that reform, because that reform mainly affects the finances in the high needs block rather than the county council's budget. But it is also true that in the current overall financial context, in a whole variety of ways, the local authority is putting an enormous amount of money into the SEND system in a way that wasn't originally envisaged. The intention was a separation between the SEND budget and the county council's core budget. So whether that's interest payments, but also a whole variety of staffing teams that we've had to substantially increase in size and various other resources to put into the SEND system, that creates a pressure on our finances, which creates part of the reason for the requirement for even more savings. So there is a direct impact between the SEND financial crisis going unresolved and the county council's own finances, but I wouldn't say any of the savings that are listed here need to be deferred because of that particular delay.
Thank you, James. Andrew, did you want to come back?
Yes, I did actually. James covered that, but just to make that point is that with the can clattering down the road yet again, the money left in that we are holding off balance sheet within the DSG is forecast to reach 180 million by the end of this financial year, and there is an inherent cost to that. It's staff costs because we're having to work with the DFE and they're not coming back to us quickly, but it's also the interest cost. This money would otherwise be being used, that 180 million would otherwise be being used as cash balances to deliver the services for this council. We're having to borrow instead, and there is a direct cost and direct interest cost which is substantial due to that 180 million, and the safety valve project is which the DFE put us on, and which we have worked with DFE carefully, remains outstanding. We're waiting the DFE to come to a conclusion on that, and I suspect they're waiting for the SEND review, so that's going to take longer time. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Andrew. It's the unknown, what we'll be expected to do, and try and set a budget, bearing in mind what is around the corner. And I doubt there'll be any new responsibility money if they look at new ways of doing things. It's the same money. So, yeah. So I think next on my list I've got Maxine. Councillor Webb, please.
Thank you, Chair. I wanted to get some detail on some of the savings proposals that are in the report, please. Some more information on, first of all, CS002 on page 40, reducing reliance on residential placements through preventing escalation of need, and what that looks like in practice in terms of, there's quite a lot of money there that's being saved, and what that actually means in practice. And I also wanted to ask about the home to school transport savings that are in here, particularly those that need consultation, and how presumably that's in addition to the public consultation that's out at the moment, and how that's going to work, and is it going to be, I can't see that it happening in time for the next round of this. So are we actually considering those items here in this, are we looking at them now, or is that going to come later once they've gone out for consultation? Thank you.
Look to you, James, please.
Thanks. So taking those in turn, I mean, obviously, as you say, the substantial savings there in the social care space based on the reduction in residential placement. So as we're all aware, some children coming into care end up in residential care, usually where they've got particularly acute and complex needs, and actually those placements cost hundreds of thousands of pounds for a single placement, given the level of care that has to be provided to those children and young people. And so sometimes that's the right thing to do and is absolutely necessary for a particular cohort, but we do want to reduce that, and the best way to reduce that is to meet the need earlier, either by keeping the family together, or if that's not possible, providing specialist, often therapeutic input to those young people to resolve some of the trauma, which then enables them to live more easily with a foster carer rather than multiple staff members in a residential facility. So it's quite hard to answer your question because it comes from a whole range of things. A lot of that relates to the further strengthening of our core social care operating model and family help in the next phase of that, which we think will have a further preventative effect on the number of children coming through. Some of it relates to specific edge of care services, but it also recognises the strengthening of the support within our looked after children's services and wrapping around that help to reduce the numbers requiring residential placements. And although it's sort of in the mix in the background of this, we're also obviously having a major push as an authority on recruiting foster carers. So in terms of the things that we need to do as an authority to reduce the reliance on residential placements, if we have enough foster carers in Norfolk to ensure that every single child who can be fostered is fostered, then that would actually further substantially reduce the reliance on residential placements. We'd like to be in a place where we only use residential where it's exactly the right thing, but sadly at the moment sometimes we do make residential placements because we just haven't got enough foster carers of the confidence and skill level to meet that need. And so there's a whole range of things going on together which will hopefully add up to the benefit to young people and the financial saving under that line. In relation to homeschool transport, obviously, so Councillor Webb and I actually met earlier this week to discuss this as well, but I'll sort of repeat that conversation for the benefit of the committee because it probably is helpful. Exactly as sort of outlined, there's a range of home to school transport savings in this pack, and particularly those that relate to children with special educational needs and disabilities. So these are proposals at this stage, and actually, although we think, as Councillor Jameson articulated, these are positive things, they're not cuts, they're not reductions in offer, they are nevertheless changes to ways of working which would be new for families. And anything you do in the space of change and transformation, particularly with that cohort, needs to be done really, really carefully and in sort of co-production with the sector. And so rather than it just being part of a sort of standard consultation process for the budget as a whole, we are going to do a separate engagement process with those families affected to sort of test the thinking that's in the proposals. And then if that is positive, it would then go on to a formal consultation as well, but that would be separate to and in addition to the main consultation on the budget. So actually these proposals probably will appear as a separate paper, and so therefore come somewhat outside of the main budget process in order that we get them exactly right. And obviously if that engagement or indeed the formal consultation made us think the proposals weren't positive, then they wouldn't go forward. So I know that Councillor Carpenter is really keen to see what the engagement tells us from the sector before we're coming to a final view. But at this point, we think that they're things that are worth looking at. You know, as we just talked about, you know, a further expansion of personal budgets in broad terms is positive because actually it gives families another option and saves us some money on paid for transport with taxis, etc. But it's easy to say that. You've got to look at the detail with the families as to how that would work. To pick that one as an example. So I hope that's helpful.
Yeah, thank you, James. I mean, one of the things that I'll come back to Maxine as well, but one of the things that we're obviously being asked to do at this point is to, you know, sort of agree with the proposed measures that are being put forward. And it sounds like for that particular one, there'll need to be a caveat that there's still some more meat to go on the bone in terms of what the detail will look like. So it will be, you know, if there's support from the committee, it will be some support on the basis of, you know, that you can assume that it will be being delivered and deliverable, and obviously that there'll be support and buy-in from people as we change the way that we work. And I always wonder if it's best to change the way we work from the new case, you know, as the new cases come in, this is the way we now do things, rather than going to all the people who've already had things done a certain way, and now we're going to change everything, you know, that you've previously had done. And whether that would deliver the savings, probably not because of the period of time. But you know, that I think we need to bear in mind when we stick our hands up or otherwise to support each of those recommendations that we've got within our agendas. Maxine, did you want to come back on the answers that you'd received?
Thank you. Yeah, I just find it quite difficult that we're being asked to sort of look at something and comment on it when we don't really know what it means. You know, even, and I appreciate that there's very complex stuff, but I just find it difficult. You know, we're supposed to have a scrutiny function, and I don't know, there's not a lot we can really scrutinise here. So whether they need to be part of other papers so that we can actually do that. And, you know, you've talked about foster carers, and I know, you know, and if there's work being done there to prevent children going into residential care, should we also be considering, you know, we've got this issue with the adoption support and special guardianship fund at the moment that's been, you know, was cut by government, not the council, but the work, the impact of that on adoptive families is, you know, we could have the same issue with children going back into care if that support for those families breaks down because of the lack of the difference there. So there just seems to be a lot of different things going on, and I just find it really hard to be able to scrutinise that because we haven't got a lot of information. I note that with the home to school transport, and I appreciate that there's going to be another process, but I do think it's important that that it is very transparent for families what these things actually mean. You know, I know we're looking at boarding points for some children. In this paper, it's called independent travel, but we do already have an independent travel programme, Titan, which is already operating. So if that's working, then some of those things should already be happening. I don't know why we've got a separate item and why we're talking about boarding points. I know it doesn't say that in here, but it said it on a previous paper. So I just want it to be really transparent so that we actually are sharing with people when we do these engagement exercises what these things actually mean, because it's not very clear to me as a member from here.
No, and we've got a broad brush agenda item on the overall budgetary position. So the detail down within each of those strands is going to be, you know, hard to assess from the report that we've got. But it's fair to say from what James said previously that if there are specifics on this, then of course it could come forward as a separate item to this committee. And obviously we look at the work programme, but I mean there was the offer of the fact that was you know, likely to need a more in-depth report, and I absolutely agree with you. You know, we cannot necessarily scrutinise the entire children's service operation in a half hour, 3/4 of an hour agenda item on the budget, and actually that's why we need the you know, additional items to sort of fill in and broaden our knowledge and get to the real bottom of how these changes and what difference that actually will make. So I appreciate your input on that. James, did you want to add anything to that? And then I've got just a quick word from John before I go on to Dan.
Yeah, I mean, just to further reassure, as I did when we met, that absolutely anything in the space of home to school transport around SEND will be transparent. So as I say, there will be an engagement with the sector in which we will explain in a more detailed way what is meant by the sort of high level descriptions that are in here, discuss that with families who have lived experience of those services, test the thinking, and make sure that goes out using our we have partner organisations who represent parent carers, and we'd work with them to get the message out, if you like, and then ahead of a sort of formal consultation, again, that would be publicised quite widely and can go quite directly to those families. So the transparency will be really, really clear in all of those proposals. And I think the forward plan for this committee does include home school transport at some future point. So it could be that if the timings work, we could update how that has gone as part of that.
Yes, thank you, James. Do you just want to come in on this point, John? Yeah?
Very briefly. Very briefly, James. I think CSO 5 to CSO 9 is roughly the points that I think Maxine's referring to on home to school transport. Now, and the comment that we have got some of this in place already, but I know, so on a simple answer, if your experience of working with some of the families already that you've had in the past couple of years on working with home to school transport, you've got about roughly 750,000 savings identified in those, I say from 05 to 09. How confident are you that you can actually meet that 750,000 saving at this stage?
Oh, goodness. No, I would say there's a reason why I have confidence. It's worth bearing in mind that the budget here is £72 million. So as a proportion of all of that, these savings are not insubstantial, but also it doesn't represent, you know, an enormous reduction. And actually, indeed, there's demographic growth money that goes into that budget, which offsets it. So I think you'll find that in cash terms, next year's home to school transport budget would be pretty similar to this year's. You just got some money going in to address the pressures and some coming out. So I would have a good degree of confidence that we will hit that. But I would also say a lot of these things are based on modelling and therefore represent an estimate rather than a fixed target. So if, taking the example of the personal budgets one, the team have made an estimate of how many families might take up an enhanced offer. If we make an enhanced offer, we can't know that until we do. We might save a bit more, we might save a bit less, but there wouldn't be that one as an example is entirely voluntary for families. So we wouldn't be saying because we've applied a savings target of 228,000, as in that case, we must impose that solution on X number of families to achieve it. It would be entirely down to the work with those families, and so it could be that more take it up or less do. And so I would acknowledge these are, in quite a few cases, an estimate as best we can on modelling, but I'd be reasonably optimistic on the overall achievement.
Thank you. Councillor Roper. Dan, you've been waiting patiently. Come to you next.
No, that's fine. There's a couple of points. I mean, the first one follows on from Councillor Webb. Excuse me. I need to have confidence, actually, that between CS05 and CS09, there is some of those are quite close together and a risk of overlap. And I think one of my concerns is a risk of double counting in some of that, because contract is mentioned on a number of those lines. How can we be sure and assured that actually all of those savings independently can be delivered? Because I do fear that we might be counting the same money twice. That's my first question.
I mean, it's a good point, well made. I mean, the team ask themselves that question and test that as part of the business case development to try to make sure that we're not sort of fishing in the same pool of families more than one time. Again, I would come down to a judgment call around what is the amount of saving that we can make, and we're pretty optimistic that the overall package of benefit will be in the right range and that we won't have overstated that, because we have asked ourselves that exact same question. But it is quite likely that I might end up saying to you, we delivered, roughly speaking, the overall impact, but the exact amount saved from the different lines did vary a bit from the way it was profiled here, because, as I say, it's a really complicated world. It's based on modelling, and exactly as you described, the two things do net off. So it could be that if the personal budgets one, for example, massively over-delivers, that means there's less people whose contract we could make an efficiency saving on from the sort of high cost placements one, and so that you could over deliver there and then therefore have less impact over here, and that could indeed play out in the way that you described. So I would absolutely want to own the fact that this is best judgments and modelling, and it can't be. I wouldn't want to say to you that every single target will be hit in exactly the way that it is described here, but I can't see a different way to do it really.
Thank you. I did wonder if that would be the case, and that's one for the committee to consider probably in the next financial year in terms of how it then monitors the budgets. I just want to go on to a different area, Chair, if that's all right, and that is on CS002, where there are some quite large numbers there, and we can all absolutely agree with the sentiment behind CS002 in terms of reducing reliance on residential placements. But when you see large figures like that, 2.5 million, 2 million, they look awfully like balancing figures, and you wonder how robust and reliable they actually are. So I'm looking for a bit more detail and granularity on how that's going to be achieved. Roughly how many children are we talking about here not going into residential care and being cared for alternative settings? How many more foster carers will we need in order to achieve those targets, for example? And are the trajectories actually right that we're going to hit that 2.5 million in the next year?
So definitely not a rounding figure, definitely all based on a range of separate business cases coming together. There is an element of then, as looking at, again, the overall package, so it's in the same way I described there for home to school transport, we will look at and say, actually, if you've got a whole range of proposals that are trying to achieve the overall effect, even if you've got 4 or 5 separate ideas, what does that all add up to in terms of the total impact you're trying to have on residential care, trying to avoid the double counting? And as part of that, therefore, there probably is a process of saying, let's call that 2.5 million rather than calling it 2.634 million when you add it up all in, in order to get the right sort of ballpark and recognise that interplay. I guess to give the committee a sense of the scale of it, a residential placement in care now is probably at least £250,000, and that's actually for one of the more standard ones. You are seeing more and more children costing, where the package of care is £10,000 a week, which is clearly £500,000 a year. So 2.5 million is no more than 10 placements, and it's worth us bearing that in mind. So we're not we have about 120-ish residential placements at the current time. It varies, obviously. So again, in terms of the proportionality, we're not talking about halving it in 1 year. But I would also own that that is an area in children's services that we've set targets in previous years that we've not hit, because although the schemes that have delivered really successfully, for every prevention or every step down, more children have come through than we'd previously been expecting, given the level of trauma and the lack of foster carers. So there will be a process going on alongside the savings here to look at the underlying level of pressures, money and demographic growth, and whether that is actually accounted for in the right way, because actually you've got to make sure you understand how much pressure would happen under a do-nothing scenario, as well as how much preventative effect you can have. So we're weighing all of those things. On the topic of foster carers, I mean, in some ways we want as many foster carers as we can get, but I mentioned earlier that there's a cohort of children where we think there could have been a fostering placement that mitigated a residential placement had the foster carer existed. We've looked at that in quite a detailed way, as perhaps you would imagine. There probably are about 40. So if we had 40 foster carers, and I say not, to be clear, we would need to be ideally quite experienced foster carers who were able to work with the most complex level of need, that difference of 40 would turn 40 residential placements into 40 fostering placements, and the saving from that would be millions, more than 10 million as an example. So that's not a 1 year. We're not going to achieve that in 1 year, but we've set ourselves quite ambitious targets around fostering. We would hope, if it succeeds, that over a number of years we would get to the place where residential numbers were down really quite substantially, hence you seeing sort of several years here of saving plotted through. So there is by way of reassurance modelling behind all of it.
Or pessimism in terms of what we're likely to receive from government, given that there is still a £25 million to be made up in the budget, because of course where we want to be as a committee is not in a position where we're going to be asked for more at any point in the future.
So we haven't taken an unduly optimistic view of what we will be getting from central government. We've worked, we're perhaps slightly more conservative than the CCN views on what rural counties would get, as opposed to metropolitan areas, they saw at that stage the mood music was for a substantial reduction, perhaps in inner London metropolitan boroughs and also metropolitan boroughs in the north. Now, whether that has been able to sustain the no doubt strong political pressure remains to be seen, but we haven't been over optimistic, and therefore I feel that the basis on which we are working is quite robust. We've gone through the process, which you'll be very familiar: Budget Challenge 1, Budget Challenge 2. The degree of complexity is such now that Budget Challenge 3 is always a thing. Indeed, I've just put forward, we just completed Budget Challenge 2.5, focused just on children's, adults, and infrastructure being the three major departments. And what I would say is this, actually, Dan, is that I think everybody knows, the senior management team knows that we're the local authorities are up against it. You know, there isn't easy savings. There's no low-hanging fruit, and that working together holistically as Norfolk County Council, not as Children's Services or as adults, but working holistically is the way in which we can stitch this budget together. So, yeah, a week is a long time, but frankly, 2 or 3 months isn't long enough, because we'll need to look for further savings following Budget Challenge 2.5. We're definitely going to need to. We have other things at our disposal. I've mentioned to you this budget is done on the basis of a 2.9% increase in council tax. So we have other options available to us in order to be able to deliver a robust budget going forward. But given all the changes in LGR, I think that the one thing that I am really focused on is making sure that this integral part of Norfolk's public sector landscape, remember we deliver 85% of everything gets delivered in Norfolk, with the 7 districts doing the other 15, that this is stable, solid, going forward into this new, bright new future, whatever it may be.
Thank you. I've got Councillor Smith-Clare next. Mike, please.
Thanks, Brian. Fortunately or unfortunately, Dan has already eloquently asked 2 of my points. But as a backup, and these aren't like, pulled out of the bag just to bother you guys, and that is a concern about what I see as an overlap between the adult social care reduction and the impact that that will have on families and children. And that is with regards to the reduction in the opportunity for people that require support, adults that require support, families that require support, having the reliance on their assistance being given to community groups, low-level community options and projects, where we know that in the current landscape, so many of those provisions are lacking funding, are constantly changing, and I'm concerned that that will then impact not just on the families, but the young people that exist within those families. So is there a consideration between our area and adult services of possible impact? I do have another point, but has that consideration been made?
Slightly difficult one for me to answer, because obviously I'm not the expert in the adult proposals. So obviously when we do the budget setting, the proposals are discussed in the round with the different departments round one table for exactly the reason that you describe, is to try to spot any overlaps. And absolutely, you're right to say that in some cases, adults being supported by the county council due to their needs or vulnerabilities also have children. So there is the potential for that impact. It is not my understanding that what is proposed by adult social care would constitute a reduction in support in such a way that it would have a meaningful impact on children. But I just want to say, a note of caution, that I couldn't speak with any authority to the detail of the adults' proposals and what it means for communities. So I don't anticipate that impact. That hasn't been something that's been indicated in those discussions at all, but I can't really answer in a detailed way as to those proposals, I'm afraid.
Mike, you want to come back?
Yeah, I will continue, and I think it's something that we as a group need to have that information, because from my experience of working within communities, of course, families that are impacted by a loss of support or a framework of support for a family or a family member does impact greatly, not just on the family itself, but on the children per se. So I would always be concerned if we see a loss of funding from one area without considering the impact that it has on another. And I possibly think that might be a useful opportunity to see if that has not just been considered, but a strategy in place in order for that to be alleviated if that is the case.
Yeah, I can see, I think, where you're coming from, Mike, on this one. And if we rewind back to when we had a select committee that covered adults and children, that sort of crossover thing where if something's affecting the adult in a family, what's the knock-on effect on the children within the family, was kind of all in that sphere. And here now it's been divided between two different select committees. However, as an authority, of course, we do come together at full council and do, and obviously at that point, we've then got all of the select committee chairs in place, all of the members in the meeting, to actually determine whether those impacts, could have an adverse effect, and I mean that may well dictate a little bit on how we feel about the proposed savings, perhaps within adults. Affecting the children in our, in our sphere of operations. Is that a fair thought on how that is considered, James, Andrew?
Mike, it's a point well made, and the select committees have been restructured in order that a degree of scrutiny, not just sort of nodding through, can go ahead. So I think this is the point where the adults committee is next week, Thursday, so I'm back here. I mean, if you were able to make it, I think that it's a point to bring up there at the committee and see if you get a satisfactory answer. And if you feel that there's work to be done, then there's a paper required really to see what this holistic, the effect of working together, adults, which I do see, but it's all really my saying. I think that it would be perhaps useful if you came, if you could, and then we can take it from there. Yeah.
Titus, you want to come in here?
Thank you, Chair. I guess just to reinforce and add to some of the comments that have been made, as James said, clearly in the process of developing savings, there are conversations that happen within the organisation at exec director level and other levels within the council to ensure that the savings proposals are complementary to one another and there aren't those unintended impacts. Again, as I think you said, Chair, there are other forums as well where the totality of the budget and the impacts of proposals are considered. So Strategic and Corporate Select Committee looks at the entirety of the budget. But the other point I would make is that at the point where final decisions about the budget are made, so January Cabinet and February full Council, members will of course have access to the full equality impact assessments, which will take into account the totality of proposals and the way that they interact with one another as well. So that information is there to inform that decision making at that point too.
Thank you, Titus, and thank you, Mike. That's a very valid point. Do you have another point you wish to make, or is that?
Yeah, just one other point, and that's with regards to CS 004, and it's the first point, the development of regional solutions to get better value for money from commissioning activity. It's more of an alleviation of a concern, and that is, how do we avoid that becoming patchy? Because if we're looking at regional solutions, can we ensure that that is covered across the board, rather than it just being specific to a particular geographic area?
Yes, happy to comment on that one. So the regional work that's described there is covering our work to create Commission East, as it's known, which is the sort of our version of the regional care collaborative concept, which came out of the National Social Care Review, and actually Norfolk is acting as the lead authority, if you like, in coordinating that and standing up for the region. The intention of the work is to actually just collaborate and share best practice and data across the region, but also to do some commissioning as a region. It will be partly about leveraging our scale to get efficiencies, and actually if you're just buying, if you like, in bulk, you can get some better prices, and the saving that's modelled here effectively is through an initial scheme to block books and residential care using, several authorities buying it together can secure a better deal, which works in the interest of ourselves financially and that of providers in terms of certainty. But it's also actually about leveraging our collective power to get the right partnership with the sector. I think we would recognise there are some providers out there doing absolutely fantastic work and working with us really positively, but some who are less so, and there's a financial cost driver incentive, and in a world of what is actually a monopsony, if you like, where the authorities are the only buyers of service, you can imagine that the leverage isn't very strong, and therefore providers can move on to somebody else if they won't accept our terms and conditions. So we're trying to work as a region to challenge that to some extent, and actually say we need, if you're going to work in the children's care market, we need you to behave like public servants rather than, at least to a good extent. You can make a profit, that's fine, and they're not challenging a commercial enterprise existing, but they have to work in the right way. And so a lot of the idea here is to work with the sector to try to get a much more collaborative approach with providers. And that's not just about unit price, but actually a lot of the cost that comes here comes when providers, for example, placements break down. and they give us short notice and they say, actually, we can't work with this child anymore, we'd like to give notice, and then we have to make another placement for that same child, which almost always comes at a higher cost, as well as being a dreadful outcome for the young person themselves. So in a variety of ways, we think we can do better working as a region, but I would want to give you reassurance. The intention here is not to get to a place where the region buys everything together in a totally uniform way. There will be a range of frameworks, deals, projects set up. Each authority can judge each one on its merits and what works for them. And a lot of it will be, as I described there, it's about the leverage into the behaviours rather than a sort of idea that in time the entirety of everyone's care will be delivered by some mega entity that buys everything. So in that way, I think we can be reassured that each authority will still get what it needs for its own purposes, rather than it being, you know, Essex gets an unfairly large proportion of the pie, if that makes sense.
Okay, I've not seen any further... Oh, Maxine. Sorry, I was thinking, I haven't seen any further hands. Maxine, come to you, please.
Thank you. Yeah, it's just a quick point, just to follow up from what James mentioned earlier as well. And we've got home to school transport coming up on the forward work plan. I know we'll talk about the forward work plan later, in March, and we've also got fostering and adoption coming up at that same committee. So can we ask now that in terms of the home to school, the work that's being done does come to this committee at that point, please, if everyone's in agreement, and also that some of the things we talked about under CS002 that James mentioned, increasing foster carers and so on, that is part of those papers as well in March, so that we've got that higher detail in those papers, please, for those items.
Yeah, I think that would be helpful if it could be, so that those forward agenda items have that as part of the theme of them.
Yeah, it's just worth saying. So I think homeschool transport, I think that works well. I think it's actually quite likely that a paper on fostering will go to Cabinet ahead of that, because we're looking as an authority to make an investment in the fostering space, which is very much a positive thing. That doesn't mean it's not helpful, though, to come here in March to update on committee oversight of that. And I am really interested in the question of also, just throwing it back, what councillors can do in your sort of community leadership role to support the fostering agenda, and actually having that discussion quite explicitly, I think, would be quite powerful, because it's of critical importance. It changes the lives of the children, where every foster care recruited is a life changed, as well as the financial benefit of it. So if we can have a look at it in March, that suits me fantastically. Yeah.
Thank you. John.
Thanks, Chairman. Just to move on, away from children's services, actually, to the other bit of the responsibility of this committee. On page 40, who is here from museums?
You've got libraries, but not museums.
Or do we not have anyone from museums?
We don't, but ask, I might be able to try.
It was actually an explanation of COM 001, and also when we're looking at COM 007, 008, I just wonder whether we ought to be looking at some of the costs, staff costs of museums, and whether, in fact, I might pick this up anyway when we discuss the work programme later.
Can you pop your mic on, please?
Sorry. So COM 001 is about libraries and non-staff expenditure. Yeah. That one first. So that one is me. So libraries currently have quite a healthy budget for things that are non-staff expenditures, over £1 million, lots of contracts, and libraries at its heart is people, but also it's a very large operational service, 47 libraries, 6 mobile libraries, which means when we buy things, we buy a lot of things. What we also benefit from is having really, really good data about who uses the things we buy and how often we use these things. So, you know, when we buy a book in a library, we don't buy one copy, for example, but we know exactly who's taken out the book, how many times, how the copies have moved around and where we've got to. So we'll be taking a really close look at our contracts, the things that we buy, the number of things that we buy, whether there's things that we buy that actually don't get issued at all, and we need to think about not buying those things. So it's a number of different things that will make up the saving. We've also got some areas we need to look at where there's things that we do in libraries we don't have to do, but we do because it's helpful for customers. So, for example, DVDs. So,
Sorry, when was this last looked at? I mean, is this an annual process, but you believe you can make some savings, or is this something that hasn't been looked at for a while, and hence there are savings to be made with a closer look?
we look at it internally all the time, as you would expect us to. We've not taken a saving from this budget for probably 10 plus years. Actually, what we did is we capitalised the budget in previous budget rounds. We're now uncapitalising the budget, which gives us an opportunity to make a saving in a way, whilst it was capital, we couldn't realise for you in the revenue budget. So it's not as scary as it sounds. And there are things that we do, like I say, like DVDs, where 20 years ago, the service was probably making a healthy income stream from DVDs. And now when I have a look, I'm sure it's going to tell me, you know, probably costs us to give DVDs out to people. And so there's some things we just need to get, you know, modernised and turned down. So it'll be a number of things. It's a budget that hasn't been considered for quite a long time because it's been in the capital space. The two museums ones was at 7 and 8 later down. Again, that's 7 is a staff saving, as you said. There's been savings that have come through the service before relating to museums around staff, but that's a saving that we think can be delivered. The next one is income, and particularly with the opening of the castle, we're getting more weddings through, there's more opportunity to do things. The thing to note with the museum's budget is it's a largely externally funded service, so whilst there might be a budget, actually a massive proportion of what they spend is external funding that comes in, so it's quite a delicate budget. But we think those are both deliverable measures for museums for the following year. Hopefully that helps.
Okay, that's fine. I'll come back to that when we... I'll come back to that when we probably discuss our future work programme. But yeah, thank you.
And as a bit of a supplementary to that, when I read non-staff expenditure in libraries, I also thought about the sort of bigger fixed costs that you have for libraries, because we try and keep them lit and warm for those that use them. And, you know, what investment there's been in things such as the panels on the roofs of the buildings that would take solar panels, so that the electricity costs are going down from a capital investment, and likewise where you know, heating systems, if they utilise electricity, you know, that will obviously help those costs as well. So whether that's something that's being considered, because one of the things we're asked to do is put forward suggestions on you know, additional things that could make savings, and that to me is a potential capital investment to help the cost. It's a lot of years since I've been up on the roof of what will be the new building in Kings Lynn, but there were definitely no solar panels up there when I looked. But now I haven't been up there in a long while, so I don't know if there's proposal to be solar panels up there now. But it's an area of space where we could be getting some benefit from, and I'd much rather see them on libraries and buildings that we own than I would do in some of our fields around the Norfolk countryside. So thoughts on that, please? The short answer to that one is all of those building costs are, of course, in the property service, not in the library's budget, as they are for any other buildings. The long answer is, yes, there's all sorts of things going on. So not just the new library in Great Yarmouth, the new library in Kings Inn. It's going to be built to a standard that's really, you know, the best standard you can have around these things. It's a big estate, there are opportunities. It's also a very varied estate of libraries. You know, 3 really big ones, Great Yarmouth, Millennium in Norwich, one of the busiest libraries in the country, not the county, in the country, Kings Lynn, and then between that, a varied estate from, you know, medium-sized libraries to very, very tiny village libraries where there's really not much opportunity, but we do work with property to do as much as we can around the estate. Look to try and get the running costs as low as possible with that type of thing. Thank you. Looking around the room, I've got Leslie next, please.
I was just going to tell you there are solar panels going on to the new library in Kings Lynn. I've been around the building site.
Oh, you're lucky. I never had an invite to look around the building site, but there, well done. Excellent. Well, we are asked as a committee to consider the latest budget and medium-term financial plan and the approach to it, noting in particular emerging risks and uncertainties within the Council's planning position, which I think we've done. We've looked at that. We've got to consider and comment on the savings. Again, specifically, we have done from CS01 through to CS 012, and also looked at COM 001 onto 008. And we're also asked to note the budget gap, and it does say within the report there, new initiative which would deliver savings. And I do wonder from the chair if the portfolio holder could confirm the position on within all of the departments within our sphere of operation, but the council more generally, position on staffing, recruitment, vacant posts, and what length of time they're sort of funded for before the funding for the post is removed. And, you know, because obviously there are often in budgets turnover savings when posts become vacant, but obviously an approach that doesn't see you know, immediate replacements without sort of higher level of scrutiny for portfolio holder or senior officer staff can drive savings during year. And I wondered if that was being considered.
Yes, thank you very much indeed, Chair. Yes, it is being considered. There's always a gap, if you like, between the total number of budgeted full posts in terms of FTEs, full-time equivalents, and the actual amount. And a lot of that differential comes as a function of something that I put in place over a year ago now, last July, enhanced financial controls. And there's a great deal more granularity when it comes to re-employing people or refilling posts, so that new posts, or rather when a post becomes vacant, rather than just clunk filling it again, you know, there is a serious discussion as to whether there have been changes either in the way in which services could be delivered, or in whether technology has altered the way it can be delivered. There's it's mentioned a bit in the children's services. I thought I saw. Children's services, let's have a look. CS11, smarter working and use of technology, including review of staffing structures. That sort of kind of covers that, I think.
And James wants to come in as well, please.
Yeah, just on a couple of points. So one, I can absolutely confirm that every Tuesday afternoon I spend a chunk of my time reviewing all the staffing recruitment for the department and asking ourselves the question, you know, do we absolutely need to fill this post? And I think that's right and proper in the financial context. But I would also make the point that very often having enough staff saves the council money. You know, taking an obvious example of social workers, if you were just to, in a crisis, constrain your staffing to the greatest possible extent, you wouldn't have enough people to work out in communities to work with the families to turn situations around. You'd have more children in care, and that would cost you a lot more than you'd save in your staffing. So I think it's really important that we just make that point continually, is that taking a view which is just, we can pare this all back to the leanest possible ever, might seem initially attractive, but actually if you undermine the strength of the service, you end up spending the money in a different way and often less effectively. So it's a balance.
Getting the balance right in that instance, because if you, as you say, if you go too much too hard, we haven't got a service to support those that most need it. So I absolutely get where you're coming from on that one. Excellent. So in terms of the recommendations, are we happy to agree all those, or do we need to have a show of hands to indicate support? Are all in agreement with those recommendations? I haven't seen, and anyone against those recommendations? No? In which case, thank you very much for that one. We will move on to item 8, and that's young people's participation in post-16 education, employment and training. Starts on page 62 of the agenda. Councillor Carpenter is a responsible cabinet member. Penny, do you want to say anything at this point in time?
Not too much, because I've got 2 experts sitting here.
You have
so
indeed.
I don't know whether it's going to be Tim or 4 experts. I beg your pardon. 4 experts sitting right behind me. So I think
a whole row of experts.
I'm
behind
delighted
you.
that they're
Yes.
sitting there, I have to say. So do you want me to start off with Tim? Or where do you want to start, Tim, on that one?
I can. Do you want me to?
Yes, please.
Yep. So Tim, please, if you would then introduce the report. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chair and Committee. I think we're here at your invitation from when we came last time in terms of looking at prevention and early help, and you wanted a bit of an update and an overview of the work we're doing to support young people as they move into education, employment and training. I am joined by a number of colleagues because actually this is not one team job in terms of providing opportunities for young people. Indeed, it's not just the role and responsibility of the local authority. So I have got colleagues from Growth and Investment and from Children's Services who will hopefully be able to answer all the tricky questions that you've got when we get to that stage. I've got a few slides just to help navigate through the report, so I'll quickly whip through those. I won't take too much time. So in terms of the report itself, fundamentally, we've tried to provide an overview that's framed around 3 aspects of the work that we do, which is activity to prevent young people from becoming not in education, employment or training, or known as NEET. Unfortunately, for some young people, they do end up in that situation, and therefore an overview of the work that we do to support those that do become NEET. And then the third element is around the significance of partnership working in this space, which I've already touched on. All of that within the context of it feeding into our ambition, shared ambition that we've got, that we've signed up to as a county council, but actually across the system in relation to Flourish, as well as the council's strategic priorities, which you are obviously fully aware of. In terms of context, probably helpful to put a little bit of context here. Certainly since 2024, there has been an increase in the number of 16 and 17-year-olds within Norfolk's population. That's a demographic increase, so the population is increasing. And obviously that increase has an impact in terms of thinking about the numbers that are either in education or training or indeed those that are NEET. And we know that that population increase is going to continue for the next few years. Helpful to understand the legal framework that we operate in as a council in terms of what our responsibilities are, and you can see on the screen the primary 3 kind of headline responsibilities in terms of the local authority. One is around securing sufficient education and training provision for young people over the age of 16, but under the age of 19 or up to 25 if they've got special educational needs. We have to make available the support to enable young people to access that provision. So it's not just about providing places, it is about making sure that young people are supported to be able to do that. And we have a key responsibility to track all 16 to 18-year-olds, of which there are obviously quite a large number. But we, part of Karen Porter's team, spends a lot of time making contact with young people, keeping in touch team to try and track, and I'll come back to that in a little bit. The challenge in this space is that those are very clear responsibilities on local authorities, all local authorities, but certainly for us as a county council. But the Department for Education is actually responsible and holds the budget for funding provision. So there is a tension in the system that whilst on the one hand we are held accountable for the sufficiency of the system and provision for post-16 education, employment and training, but we don't hold the budget and nor do we take the action to actually secure that provision. And it's one of the reasons why we have formed a close working relationship with relevant colleagues at the Department for Education. A slide here just really around why this is a council priority. I think it kind of is fairly obvious, hopefully, to everybody in the room, but it definitely aligns to the council's Better Together strategy, and therefore increasing the number of young people that are participating in some form of education, employment or training is a key priority. And there are 3 vital bits of information that we report to members on. And indeed, we've taken this item to the performance review panel last year. There are, helpful just to highlight some of the barriers to young people's participation post-16, and we track rates of participation or not participating, and we can see geographical areas around the county where we have high rates of NEET young people. We know access and transport is an issue for young people, particularly in our more rural areas. And I think it's really important when we think about sufficiency of provision, it's not simply about we've got, say, 10,000 young people, we need 10,000 places somewhere for them to go. We need the right places that suit the needs of those individual young people, but also we need the breadth of provision that enables young people to pursue the ambitions that they have and the interests that they have. And that's where access and transport is a key issue in relation to you might have provision that's very close to where you live, but it might not be offering the type of training or education that you are particularly wanting to pursue. We know, particularly since the pandemic, that issues around emotional well-being, mental health, anxiety for many individuals, not just young people, but we know that that is a feature and a factor in relation to challenges for some young people to access provision post-16. And we know that as a result of both talking to young people through a variety of mechanisms, but also through speaking to our post-16 providers, and particularly the colleges who hold most of the young people in terms of volume. And we know from their feedback that emotional well-being, mental health is a concern. That's not to say this is about young people that have diagnosed mental health issues. This is just about social anxiety for some young people, the challenges coming out and being part of provision. And then lastly, in relation to barriers, we know the significance of what happens pre-16 to levels of engagement post-16. So if we have young people that have had poor attendance in school or lack of engagement in mainstream education, we know that they are much more likely to be at risk of not being in education, employment and training, or sustaining involvement in post-16 education and training at that point. So in terms of the key focus, I've touched on these already. There's some activity that we do around preventing young people, trying to prevent young people from becoming NEET. Schools have the responsibility to provide careers, advice, information and guidance, and supporting their students, their pupils, to progress into pathways post-16. But we know that for some individuals that is challenging. We have introduced a risk of NEET indicator, or a RONI, and it's a mechanism that we've had in place for a number of years. And there's just a little bit of data there just to indicate why we believe that that approach is actually quite an effective approach. So last year, we asked school education settings to rate their pupils in Year 11 in terms of those coming to Year 11, in terms of who they think is particularly at risk of being NEET at the end of Year 11 as they go into, hopefully, Year 12. And around about 50%, just over 50% of all students were RAG rated red or amber by schools. The work that the targeted work that is then done with those young people, the reality was that just under 5% of young people were actually NEET in March the following year. That's one indication of actually, if we can get in early, if we can get in and think about there is a potential risk that this individual might end up not in education, employment and training, what can we do to support them early on? And we also have a targeted focus on particular cohorts of young people, and you've got some examples there in terms of young people that are in the care system, or young people with SEND, and those that are involved with the Youth Justice Service. And this is just some data that's in the report. I'm not going to go into this detail because you've got it in the report, but it's just part of an example of how we're using data to understand what's happening. So, of course, we're tracking the headline data in relation to, of the whole population, what percentage are NEET at particular points in the year. But we also look at that data in relation to particular cohorts, and you can see the levels vary from different cohorts in relation to wider risk issues that are in young people's lives. But there is there is definitely a correlation with young people that are not as engaged in mainstream education as we would hope that all young people would be. And then lastly, in terms of the work that we're focused on is that element around partnership working. We have a partnership education training strategy group, brings together senior colleagues from across the system. So we have schools, sixth forms represented, we have FE colleges, we have HE there, training providers, DWP, Chamber of Commerce, etc., as well as a number of local authority colleagues. Several from Children's Services. I actually chair that group, but we also have colleagues from Growth and Investment in relation to the work that we do jointly around this area of activity. So our focus on partnership working is really key, because actually we don't have the lever of moving the money to a training provider, for example. It's actually the DFE that's doing that, but we still want to be able to influence what the training provider or the education provider is actually providing. And that's all about building constructive, positive relationships that enable us to advocate for young people, to challenge, but also to support. And then the other critical relationship, partnership relationship, as I've mentioned already, is the work that we do with the Department for Education. And that continues to be really important. One of the areas that we have a particular focus on, and you'll see it in the report, and it may be something that you want to discuss in a bit more detail, we have a higher level of young people that enter employment, jobs without training post-16. And that's been a long-standing issue within the county. And that worries us. And it worries us from the young person's point of view. Well, it's great that actually they're not neat because they are in employment. But actually we want to not just have young people in employment, because what we want to have is young people that are in jobs where there's a training element to it. So actually we can help build the skills level for that individual, but also actually we can build the skills level generally within the county. And we know that as a county, our skills level at age 19 is lower than we would want it to be across the whole county. And this is the area where we work very closely with Growth and Investment colleagues. They host the Careers Hub, Norfolk and Suffolk Careers Hub, which has come across to the County Council through Growth and Investment, and also all of the work we're doing in the apprenticeship space. And that's one of the areas where we're trying to get in front of the issue about young people entering jobs without training. Just in terms of impact, very briefly, I mentioned earlier that one of the key responsibilities we have as a local authority is to track young people. We actually do really well. I say it's a royal we, it's actually Karen and her team that do the tracking. But we have consistently over a number of years been able to reach young people and know what they're doing. And it's one of the reasons why, in terms of the data that the Department for Education report on nationally, that they report on the numbers of NEET and not known. Because if we had high numbers of not known, as I would suggest one or two areas seem to have, it actually masks the overall number of young people that are NEET were not known, so they don't get counted. That's why the DFE is particularly interested in NEETs and not knowns, and actually the work that we do in Norfolk to track young people, and we add our percentage of not knowns is less than 1%, consistently lower than many other areas, and has been picked up by the Department for Education as an example of good practice, which is really positive. And then you've got a little bit of data there based on that basis, and you can see from that that actually our combined NEET and not known is broadly in line with national and statistical neighbours regional data. The bit where our performance, if you like, dips is in relation to the percentage of young people aged 16 to 18 that are participating in educational training, because of this issue that we've got a number of young people, high number of young people entering jobs without training. We'd really welcome the discussion and comment today in relation to your thoughts about what we can do and what we are doing and what more we could do in this space. We'd also like to ask Select Committee to seek endorsement and support of Cabinet to lobby and advocate on behalf of Norfolk for making sure that there's sufficient funding and focus on what needs to happen in the post-16 education employment training space that takes account of the needs of young people and Norfolk as a county. And that's particularly timely because earlier this week there was the announcement of a new national review by central government into rising unemployment levels amongst 16 to 25-year-olds. So I think there is an opportunity for us to, as a local area, to try and influence central government. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Tim. I think one of the biggest concerns, one of the reasons that I was pleased to see that we got this coming forward on our agenda was exactly that cohort that you say, the ones who are in employment, but they're just being used as cheap labour while they are 16 to 18 with no on-job training. It's mundane, routine, sort of almost what we would traditionally call dead-end jobs. But we don't want our young people in those positions. We want them to have in job training. We want them to come out of the job that they're doing with better skill sets. If they tick the box as being in employment, do we absolutely dig down and find what that employment is? Are they just being employed through gangmasters or employment agencies that just farm folk out for what we would consider temporary jobs? Because they're not unemployed, they're employed, but they're employed in jobs where there is little or no on-job training, and that's a cohort that really concerns me. But I'll open it up to the committee for any comments and questions. I thought I saw Mike. Did I see Mike first? And then I saw Dan, and then Leslie. Oh, and then Maxine. I'm going to have to write all these down. Mike first. Off you go.
Thanks, Brian. Firstly, thank you for what is a really detailed and excellent report. And I think for many of us sitting here, there's no surprises. But I do think, like you mentioned, Tim, we need to focus on those last points of what we can do to support those young people and assist them that are in work, but it's temporary. And I think if we look at somewhere like Great Yarmouth, and Penny knows this better than anyone, we have seasonal employment. And unfortunately, that seasonal employment ends around about October time, when it becomes the half term, where the majority of colleges have already taken on their role. They've started their courses, and it's nigh on impossible for that young person that needs that money, particularly for their family to survive or live independently, to then undertake a relevant course. So that young person gets caught up in a trap of remaining at level 2. And where we're looking at a growth in industry in Great Yarmouth, where the requirements are level 3, 4 and higher, we just have a cycle of unfortunate failure for those young people and their families. If we are looking at putting forward proposals, unfortunately it doesn't just rest with us. We've got to look at a restructuring of the educational system. And when I worked within FE, one of the considerations of management was looking at colleges being 52 a week year delivery organisations. So we have got to consider there being almost a new cohort start time of January, where those young people are able to bring in their income, are able to keep their families afloat, and then are able to transfer on to relevant training that can progress them within their lives. Thank you.
Mike, I absolutely agree with you on that. I've known, and of course there's also the phenomenon where the young person starts on a training course. In their mind, that's what they, got their heart set on doing. They start the course, they find out that it's not for them. They then leave that course, and they can't start another course until the next September, because that's when all the courses start. And invariably, what do they then do for that intervening period? That's something that I get. You don't want new people starting on courses every week because they've all got to catch up with what's being done. But how do we help to address that point, as Mike has raised, those dropping out of jobs and then going into college, and also the ones that drop out of college and need to find something else to do?
Thank you very much. Yeah, really, really helpful points, Mike, and really relevant. I'm going to invite colleagues. So, Karen, maybe if you want to come back on the issue around start dates, kind of flexibility in terms of training programs, education provision and flexibility, a reflection from growth and investment angle in terms of thinking about skills levels and jobs without training. So maybe Karen first.
So I think that you're absolutely right. One of the areas that we know we don't have enough provision in Norfolk is roll-on, roll-off enrolments. So we have a limited amount of post-16 providers, independent training providers who will take people throughout the year, but that is a very small number and they have been decreasing over the past 10 years really. We work very closely with all our post-16 providers, particularly the colleges because they have the volumes, and we really advocate very strongly that they should have multiple entry points. They all, in theory, do have January starts, but the practice is that particularly, and this is something that's been happening more over the past sort of 3 years probably, in practice the numbers that they have are not really available to NEET young people because what they are doing is they're mopping up people within the colleges who would drop out if they didn't have that kind of re-engagement offer. So it's stopping more young people becoming NEET, but it's not increasing the amount of provision available for those who are NEET. And I think in terms of what we can do with those young people, we obviously have a few providers like the King's Trust, who again we can refer to throughout the year, but and we run positive activities where we have a small budget where we encourage young people who are NEET to engage in a positive activity which doesn't have to be related to a vocational aspiration. It's really just something that will help that young person grow confidence, grow their ability to commit to doing something regularly, and be in a different environment relating to other adults as well as young people. And we have found that we've had very good results from positive activities. I'm sorry, Tim, I haven't got my glasses on. So
It was a little note. Just one of the ongoing dialogues we're having with the DFE is around we need more flexible provision, and we need provision that is, because sometimes our conversations with them have been, well, you've got X number of young people, you've got X places, we can't see that we need to provide more provision for you, and our pushback is it needs to be in the right place, it needs to be the right type of provision, and actually we need that kind of flexibility for exactly the reasons that Karen's talking about, which is actually, and Chair mentioned, which is, young people are not widgets that all do exactly the same thing. They all have individual lives, individual experiences, and we need to be able to accommodate and kind of respond around that. Jan, do you want to just touch on the skills as angle?
Yes, there we go. Okay, apologies. So thank you. In terms of actually the skills angle, as we know, these young people actually want to work. They want to earn. So absolutely, the opportunity around an apprenticeship, for example, could fit for the needs of some of these young people because they want to be earning. If we can get them to earn and learn and work with employers around that, that creates the opportunity. So in terms of the things that we're doing around supporting apprenticeship development, we do a huge amount through Apprenticeships Norfolk to publicise opportunities to try and encourage employers to actually see the benefits of taking on an apprentice. And that's very much hand-holding. So actually, from the point at which an employer thinks, I might like to dip my toe in the water of an apprenticeship, we can work with you. So trying to encourage employers to see it as a longer-term opportunity for young people. We've also offered incentives to employers to encourage them to take on new apprentices because we recognise the challenges that come with that and the cost that comes with onboarding and working with a new individual. We also offer mentoring support so that if an employer does take on an apprentice, they then actually know how to create that atmosphere that works for an apprentice, and that's a bit of sustainability. in terms of if they then go on to recruit an apprentice further down the line, they know what a young person might need in terms of that support. You also mentioned that actually young people sometimes are not sure what they want to do, and that's very true. You will probably be aware of the national policy around foundation apprenticeships, which do exactly that in terms of giving young people an opportunity within a particular sector area. So construction might be one of those examples, where they get a chance to try different things within an apprenticeship. And it gives them a broad base of skills that they can then move on and specialise. So they're not tying themselves into an apprenticeship in bricklaying for 2 or 3 years, when actually, having tried it all, carpentry might be a better example for them. So we do our very best to work with employers to try to encourage that skills development in a way that works for employers as well as works for the individuals. I hope that's helpful.
And that extends to TV advertising.
It does indeed.
I've seen apprenticeship for Norfolk adverts on the IT. Yep. I think it's on ITVX.
Yeah, and they are real life businesses and real life apprentices in Norfolk, giving their benefits, that saying exactly how it's really impacted in their business, and that's fantastic because
yep.
businesses will always listen to peers rather than listen to us telling them about it.
Yep. Oh, excellent. Thank you, Mike. I've got, who have I got next? Dan next, I think, yeah.
Thank you. Just jumping on Councillor Smith-Square's question, that question about young people who are in employment without training. One kind of has an idea in our head about where that probably is in the county, but I'm just wondering if you could just confirm, are there any particular geographic hotspots? One imagines Great Yarmouth is, but I'd quite like to have some confirmation about that, please.
Actually, it's the areas with the highest levels of young people in jobs without training are always between Kings Lynn and the West, North Norfolk and Breckland, and often it's around kind of market towns. So not so much Great Yarmouth.
Yeah, I think around food processing and agriculture, and yeah, there's lots of different industries that are mopping up some of the young people in terms of jobs, but jobs that aren't necessarily with training.
That's really interesting, and thank you for that, because I wouldn't want committee to be looking in the wrong places, as it were, when focusing on that issue.
But I think Mike was absolutely right on the seasonal employment side of things, and obviously we see that as well, probably to a lesser scale than Great Yarmouth, but we do see that across in Hunstanton and Heacham and so on, that part of Norfolk.
Thank you. Just next question, just on page 67, 2.3.4, and the table there. I would imagine that within that table there are probably some young people who probably fall into 2 or 3 of those columns, if not more. And so there's probably an incredibly high percentage of NEET amongst those who have got multiple factors on that. But I suppose my other question is actually, what is the NEET level for the young people who don't hit any of those as a general level? I wonder if you're able to help at all with that, please.
We report on a monthly basis on these characteristics, and on that report we have the percentage of young people who have none of those characteristics, one or more, and I think it's 1 to 3 and then more. But I have to say off the top of my head, I don't know the actual percentage of those who don't have any of those characteristics. I do know that it's approximately a third of the cohort, of the NEET cohort, who have multiple characteristics.
Thank you. If we could have some numbers outside of the meeting, that would be very helpful. Sorry.
Yeah, I was going to say we're very happy to pull that data together and get it over to you.
Thank you. And my last question is just on paragraph 4.11 and the heat map, as it were, particularly of the Norwich area. And what really stands out is that there seem to be particular hotspots. And I was wondering how accurate those particular blobs are on there, because it points to particular estates, areas of the city, dare I say, which are much bigger hotspots than those perhaps neighbouring. And I just wanted to pick up on that, and wondering how those hotspots are guiding the work which is being undertaken.
So I think what that heat map really shows is the overlap between deprivation and levels of need, which I don't think is any surprise. I think probably everybody here would have predicted that. We obviously target our workforce to work with specific geographic areas and with those areas that have the highest levels of need and deprivation. We are, however, a voluntary service, so we rely on the fact that we can engage young people and encourage them to work with us. And sometimes in those very high areas of deprivation, we find it difficult to engage with the families and the young people who we would like to.
Thank you. I think we've got Maxine next. And then I've got Leslie. Leslie was before you, was she? Oh, well, yeah. Okay, well, we'll go Leslie, then Maxine this time, then.
Thank you, Chairman. Just to tell you, I've always been interested in young people and what happens to them after school. I worked for a further education college, which obviously I was the advertising promotions manager, and we turned around adults in getting them to come into college, but there was always that group of young people that didn't. And then I went on to work for the Education Business Partnership for Norfolk, which regrettably was closed down about 15 years ago, and that was my last job. But I'm also a governor at King Edward VII in Kings Lynn, and I'm a trustee of Open Road. I don't know whether you know of Open Road, and we're just about to open up in Thetford, because we've been so successful in Kings Lynn. But I do know a family member who went to school in Kings Lynn, did very well at school in terms academically, particularly in maths and science, but she's definitely on the spectrum, but has never been diagnosed. And she's now 21 and doing nothing. And she's been overlooked, I suppose, because she went to sixth form college in Cambridge. But because of COVID, she thought school is school and home is home, and she didn't do the work. And because she'd never been statemented, she was asked to leave. And I wonder how many sorts of, would she be one of those not known? Is that the sort of, I really wanted to ask about the not known, how you reach them and what you do, or what we can do, and how can I help in any way?
So sadly, your family member would not be one of our not knowns, because our responsibility is to ascertain the education, employment or training status for all 16 and 17-year-olds and those up to the age of 25 with an education and healthcare plan or who are care experienced. So
she was 17 at the time, but went to school in Cambridge, Hills Road. So
the way in which we do it, I'll try and say it quite briefly, is we work very closely with school sixth forms, with colleges, with training providers, and all the other post-16 providers from about May onwards, and they tell us who they've made an offer, a post-16 offer to. We will then contact all the young people who don't have an offer of post-16 provision to offer our support and to try and encourage them to apply to something. We then get information from the school sixth forms, the colleges, the providers, etc., about who's actually enrolled onto a course. And then we track all of the other people who haven't enrolled. So even those who've had an offer but who haven't enrolled or who drop out very early. So we track those, and that's in fact exactly what we're in the middle of doing at the moment. So that usually equates to around 3,500 young people a year that we are actively tracking, and we do that through phone calls, through text, through surveys. We do desktop research, so we will check other databases that we have access to children's services ones, to see if other professionals are working with those young people. And we work with our, with our partners across that kind of state, across the sector. And then if somebody drops out of a college or a sixth form or any other post-16 provider, that provider has a responsibility to notify the local authority that the young person has dropped out, and we then will contact that young person to offer our support. For young people who go into employment, I think that was something that you mentioned, Councillor Long, at the beginning. If we ascertain that a young person is in employment, we would contact them after 6 months to see if they were still in employment. So I think that's probably a summary of
Which by the nature of some of the temporary jobs, they're not likely to be, are they? That's a very in and out sort of thing. Leslie, you come back. Yeah.
Can I just ask then about the home educated? It seems, I mean, we know from a briefing that we had that there are many more children being home educated than has been in the past. So is that a realistic figure on the chart, 10.3? Are they encouraged? How are they encouraged to go into education or work?
So as Tim said, there's the statutory responsibility to provide careers, education, information, advice and guidance is on the education provider. So obviously a young person who's home educated doesn't have any access to that careers education or IAG. So we as a local authority write to all the young people in year 11 in around February February of year 11 to explain who we are and what support we can offer, and we then contact those young people, and we are actively tracking to see how many of those have applied and offering support to those that haven't, and also attempting to keep those young people warm. Many of our vulnerable groups, we want to try and keep them warm over the summer period so that they don't kind of lose the will and drop off, if you like, before they can enrol.
Thank you. So definitely it's Maxine next, then I've got John.
Thank you, Chair. I've got about 4 points, if that's all right, or questions. I hope that's not too many. But, first of all, we're just going to ask whether we think whether there's an opinion about the transport policy change at age 16, whether that has an impact on some of this, you know, with transport becoming slightly more challenging for people at age 16 in terms of the, you know, the statutory duty on the local authority to provide transport, and whether that affects the choices of young people at that age to go into, you know, education, and where they're going to go, and how that might then impact what happens next if their choices aren't as much. Do you want to do that first, and then thank you.
Yeah, I'll take that one very briefly. I mean, I think you're absolutely right in terms of flagging the significance of transport. Obviously, as a local authority, we will always have an eye to what our statutory duties are in relation to provision of transport, whether that's pre-16, post-16, and that territory is quite complicated in the sense of some of the statutory duties and responsibilities. But there's a team that is focused on that. What we do know from conversations that we have with young people, we had a participation day where we had around about 80 young people from across the county, from whole different groups, came and talked to us about education generally, not just about post-16, but some of the conversations on that day were around post-16. What would help you most in relation to moving from school to post-16? What's important for you in relation to engaging? What do you think will make the biggest difference? So we've got their views as well. And also more broadly, when we've talked to young people through things like the youth advisory boards about what's important to them in their lives generally, it's not specifically about education, employment, training. Young people consistently tell us that transport is really important to them, and that's not just about getting to school. That is about being a teenager and being able to see their friends and go into wherever they want to go into, etc., etc. So we do know that transport is hugely important, and therefore it's about how we can work with transport providers, commercial networks, etc., to try and make sure that there is infrastructure there that enables young people to live their lives, and in this case also to be able to access the provision that they want to get to. We do track what sorts of journeys young people are having to make to be able to get to the courses they want to get to, travel to learn type lengths of journeys or types of journeys. And obviously if you want to do a particularly specialist course and you live in Kings Lynn as one end of the county, or it could be Yarmouth at the other end, and that bit of specialist provision is significantly away, we are conscious that we've got a number of young people that are highly motivated that will get on transport or have access to family networks, etc., that can get them to that provision. But for many young people, transport is hugely important.
I think that's not just for the urban areas, but it's really pronounced in some of the rural areas because there is no public transport alternative. And, I think parents end up being full-time taxi drivers for that sort of late teenage until they get mobile. And then the cost of car insurance and having their own vehicle becomes prohibitive in what they do for choices because they've got to earn money just to keep mobile. And I've seen that, several times in rural areas where, the first thing they want to do at 16 is start to learn the moped, and then when they get to 17 they want to learn to drive a car because they want that freedom to just go and see their mates when they want and go to work or college when they want, etc. So it's a real push, and actually where you've got a bus service that doesn't start until 9:15 in the morning for the first bus, it's not really very helpful if you want to get to college at 8:30, 9 o'clock, is it? But Maxine, you've got some more points, sorry.
Yeah, I was just going to say that perhaps with, if devolution happens and we have more power over transport, then the local authority as a whole can look at it as in the round, and maybe we can do something about it. Sorry, next. Can I just respond, just to reassure you? The other bit of work that's happening is we are working with Transport East, which is a kind of group of local authorities working with transport providers across the eastern region to try and ensure that there is a higher level, a kind of coherent transport focus and strategy. So just to reassure, but it's a good point.
Yeah, there was an online briefing from them yesterday, I think, which unfortunately I couldn't make, but they are briefing out on what they're doing in that sphere. So.
Okay, thank you. Just in terms of the point Councillor Roper made and the response about the hotspots, I mean, I can see that one of the biggest hotspots in there in Norwich is trying to work it out. I think it's probably my division and surrounding areas. And, tracking back the pattern of young people who become NEET to their education, how it starts and their journey, are we ensuring that those, because we can identify where that is most, most of those areas of disadvantage and so on, that we are ensuring more intervention and we're doing the work that needs to be done earlier on in those young people's lives, in schools, in early years, in primary school and so on, and obviously especially when they're getting into secondary, but quite often you can see the pattern when they're 5, looking at family circumstances and so on, and how that might impact their journey and their life when they become teenagers and beyond. Please, thanks.
So absolutely, yes. I think that particularly in areas of high deprivation, sadly, all too often we hear, we could have predicted, that this young person was going to become NEET at a much earlier age. Particularly around secondary school, we have school and community teams who work with the schools and they work with young people who have emerging needs. And they have been looking over the past year or so at actually ensuring that they're going in early, putting interventions in early that for young people who might then end up having problems post-16. Just the other sort of area, I know this is not talking about the early prevention, but the other area that Tim mentioned was around the risk of NEET indicators. And that obviously will pick up young people who have various different characteristics. And those risk of NEET indicators are based on Norfolk young people who become NEET. And so there was research done as to what characteristics those NEET young people had over a period of 3 years. And then they were given a weighting. So the schools have those weightings, etc., and they then look at their cohort, put in early support and intervention for those young people who are at risk of NEET. And they flag to us any young people who, in spite of the interventions that they've put in, if they feel that those young people are still at very high risk of NEET or just haven't applied or whatever, and we then pick those young people up at the end of year 11 and work with them over the summer period.
And just the other bit on that, about 18 months ago, I worked with Karen and her team to restructure a little bit, reorganise themselves a little bit so that we could make sure that the guidance advisors and the young people's advisors still part of the service, but actually could be aligned with and deployed alongside our wider support systems for young people and for families. So kind of linking into our prevention early help offer, the school and community teams, as Karen's mentioned, but actually kind of other colleagues that we know are working in particular neighbourhoods. We've all got a similar focus on actually wanting to get to those families, those individuals and those communities where we know the needs are the greatest, often tracked across to levels of deprivation.
Thank you. Maxine, you've got some more. I've got John waiting as well. So, yeah.
So I'll make this my last point. Thank you. I was kind of hoping that was thinking much earlier on, but I'll leave that for now. The other point I was going to make was around our responsibility for going up to 25 for young people with SEND. Is that just for if they have an EHCP, or is it if they've got an identified SEND without an EHCP? Yeah, both. So what happens to those? Is that age group still represented in all of these figures? What I'm concerned around is at age when a college offer finishes, for example, for a young person who has a EHCP is in a specialist college or one of our someone like Eastern College or so on, what opportunities there are at that point, because they will be something around 19, say, for example, and there's still quite a long period of time that we have a duty to those young people. If they, it goes back to what we were saying earlier on about the crossovers between us and adult social care, adult services, do they, for example, if there's nowhere for them to go at that point, and we know the difficulty with having job opportunities available to some of that cohort of people, so then maybe they'll end up in day services, for example. I'm not saying that's a bad thing, but I'm just saying, at what point do they come off of whereabouts do they sit in all of this in this data, please?
Okay, yeah, no, really, really important question actually in relation to a particular cohort. I'm going to invite a couple of colleagues. Jan, I don't know whether you want to come in, but then Phil, from a tracking point of view, at age 19 plus.
Sorry, I just wanted to pick up on the point around supporting. Sorry, I just wanted to pick up on the point around supporting young people earlier. So in terms of deprivation in the Norwich area, I don't know if you're familiar with Unity, who are doing some work in terms of their Pride of Place programme, which actually starts with supporting young people in primary schools to understand career opportunities, to think about, actually, I could be a particular whatever it might be. And they do that by inviting businesses into the schools to talk about the work that they do, to talk about the sorts of jobs that they have, not the skills at that age, because that's too far in advance, but actually just talking about the things you can do and get involved in. And that starts to help young people to understand opportunities and to develop that aspiration around a career later on. And we do work with them through the Careers Hub around actually supporting that type of activity. So I just wanted to pick up on that in terms of the point about supporting young people at an earlier stage. But I'll hand over to Phil now, who's going to pick up more specifically around SEND. And
thank
so
you. If a young person has a designated EHCP, there will be an education part of that, obviously, which will define where that young person's hoping to go, and working with professionals, that's kind of mapped out. While they still have an active EHCP up to the age of 25, they would still sit within the data for that 16 to 19 group. So it becomes a bit more tricky at post-16 to say, we get used to saying, oh yeah, year 12 or year 13, and at the end of year 13, that young person kind of disappears effectively. They become an adult. If they have an EHCP, they still sit within that 16 to 19 information group. So for all intents and purposes, for the DFE, for our data and others, they still sit within that 16 to 19 group. The age is effectively immaterial. It's whether they finish Key Stage 5 and they have up to the age of 25 to effectively finish that Key Stage 5. So they may progress, say, doing a Level 2 qualification, they move on to a Level 3 qualification, and they will progress as long as they have an active education, health and care plan. So we don't lose those people who are aged between 18 plus and 25 if they have an EHCP. They're still within our remit and within our data and within the Department for Education's data.
And is there work being done, do you work with the adults to ensure that there are choices available, you know, because...
Yeah, so when someone's plan ceased because, say, they'd got an identified qualification that they were going to do, and they complete that qualification, if they were over the age of 19, they would move over to work with adult skills and with the adult portion of council services to then pick up what they were doing, what their plans were and what their needs were.
It's very relevant. So, yeah, good to know. So the stats that we've got, they're included within the stats that presented from 16 to 19. So that's,
yes.
Yeah. Thank you, Maxine. John.
Sorry, could I...
Thank you. I must admit, what I've heard this morning about how you track people and the Ronnies are really impressed. But I'm just need to know a bit more information on that 5% that are neat and what you try to do with them. And so if they're because for the sound of it, you've got records and lists and tracks and identify people from moving to school to jobs to college and all the rest of it. So, and also the not knowns. So when they become a not known, is that because they've lost you in the system, or you've lost them in the system, or I mean, so do they just disappear, or is it the fact they will not engage and hence do not want advice and guidance on education and employment? Does that make sense? Right.
So, yeah. Okay, so in terms of what we do with NEET young people, or young people who we know are NEET, we have a workforce of guidance advisors and young persons advisors who will actively be encouraging young people to engage with us, and we do that in a variety of different ways. We do it through many young people don't want to pick up a phone, they don't actually want to talk. Somebody they don't know, they find that quite intimidating and a real turn-off. So we use what we call a multi-method approach, where we will contact a young person generally via text, say who we are, then say we are going to get in touch with them. And that increases the chances of young people actually responding to us. And once we are engaged with a young person, we will then look at any post-16 pathway options that we can refer them into. We will advocate with post-16 providers. We will look at other types of support that might be necessary, that might be needed. All the positive activities which I mentioned earlier, so all the different ways of attempting to re-engage that young person. If a young person doesn't want to engage with us, we will continually try and engage with them until they actually say...
Stop bothering me.
Yeah. The polite version of what they might actually say, yes. If they do say that, then we will put a note on the records to say that young person has requested that they have no further contact. We do tell young people and their parents that we as a local authority have a statutory responsibility to track young people. So we do try and make them aware, you know, as they're leaving school, that we will be contacting them. And we do keep continually trying to contact young people. They become unknown once they leave an education provider until we can ascertain what they're doing. So if they leave school at the end of year 11 and as far as we know they've not gone on to anything else, that's when they become unknown. And as I said, you know, we work very closely with all the other providers to work out who has actually been made an offer, who has enrolled. They then let us know if people have dropped out. We contact young people at the end of the course. So if they're on a one-year course, we would contact them to find out what they were then doing. And if they're on a two-year course, we check after the end of the first year that they've enrolled on the second year. And at the end of the second year, if they're still within our age range, we would contact them.
Can I just make a comment? The team of guidance advisors and young persons advisors that Karen has in her service, they are an incredibly skilled group of people in terms of their ability to not only reach out, not force a young person, but to encourage a young person to actually engage with them and then to continue to be involved with them. Obviously, that doesn't work for every individual, but part of the success of the work that they do is because of their kind of grit and determination to, as Karen's described, to just keep going to the point of, in some cases, irritation that please now leave us alone, but we do what we can.
So just to pick up on that, if so when they politely told you to stop bothering them, do you then have in 6 months' time or 12 months' time, do you then try to contact them again, or once they've politely told you not to bother them, does that end the chain?
So in general, if instructions not to contact a young person, we would not contact them. However, there are young people who don't necessarily want to be working with us, but who are working with a range of other professionals, both within the local authority and sometimes away from the local authority. And we will continue to liaise with those other professionals in order to understand what the circumstances are and to offer services should the circumstances change and the young person be more amenable to accepting the support that we can offer.
Thank you, and well done.
Absolutely. So we've been asked to review, discuss and comment on the details set out in this report, which I believe we've done, in relation to young people's participation in post-16 education, employment and training. What the other ask as a committee is to ask Cabinet to lobby and advocate for sufficient funding from central government and the Department for Education to ensure there is sufficient broad post-16 education training on offer within Norfolk. As a committee, are we happy to endorse that? So that concludes that item. Thank you very much on that one. We've been going just over 2 hours. I intend to have a comfort break. If the feed could be stopped, paused, whatever. Thank you. If you just confirm when that's happened.
did cover the issue of school sufficiency and sustainability of Norfolk schools, but committee members asked for an update and I think a bit more granularity around the impact in the different geographical areas of Norfolk. So what you've got here today, I suppose, is a little bit more of that detail with the sort of high-level position broken down to the different district areas and a commentary sort of patch by patch, if you like, which we hope is helpful. I think in terms of intro, I'd want to make the point that this is an issue everywhere in Norfolk, but not in a totally sort of uniform way. I do have to apologise. There's a slight error in the paper in that you might have noticed that in one of the patch areas there's a bar chart with green sort of bars showing the pupil numbers projected forward in the different year groups. And there's supposed to be one of those for each of the district areas, and due to an admin error, it seems to have not fully appeared. But I can reassure you that the trend overall is the same everywhere in Norfolk. So if you look at all of the district areas, that chart would show the same pattern of a very clear reduction in pupil numbers in all of the different districts of Norfolk. The level of decrease does vary a little bit, and as you probably would expect in areas where you've got a more ageing population and fewer young families in demographic mix, the decline is particularly steep. But I would want to make the point that it's definitely an issue everywhere, and although there are some exceptions where you've got particular pockets of housing growth, actually, you know, there are hotspots in all the different parts of Norfolk, and the overall trend is really clear. And indeed, the most recent data we've had has further confirmed the view that the birth rate and the numbers coming through is exactly as we anticipated earlier, and declining steeply. So there will therefore be that really significant impact, and it is going to, as briefed previously, lead to substantial change in the Norfolk system. So I think at this point in time, I wanted to sort of reiterate the approach we're taking in Norfolk to managing that situation. I think it's really clear from the numbers that you can see that if we do nothing, change will come anyway. That level of drop of pupil numbers, and we're talking about, you know, potentially about a third fewer pupils in a few years' time than we've got today, will absolutely lead to a lot of change for individual schools, academy chains, and the sector as a whole. That's partly because it will just change the nature of cohort sizes, and that will mean, you know, children having fewer peers in their age group, schools being required to merge classes, and that creates some real challenges for those education leaders in delivering high quality provision. But absolutely, fundamentally, that reduction in pupil numbers will lead to a reduction in the finances that schools have, and there will be a financial viability issue for lots of schools in Norfolk as a direct consequence of that. Schools are funded primarily according to how many pupils they've got on roll, according to a formula set by government nationally, and so we can't affect that in Norfolk, and so it's very clear that with that level of reduction, the current set of schools in Norfolk would be unsustainable, and just therefore no change is not really an option for us. There's lots of ways in which that can be responded to, so I want to be quite clear that although I'm painting a somewhat sort of bleak sounding picture there, absolutely through good collaboration we can mitigate the negative impacts of that and reorganise the education system in a positive way that can get us to a place that's still strong and still sustainable for the future. But schools will have to look at merging with other schools in some instances. They will have to look at their structures, they will have to look at their leadership arrangements, they will have to look at the size of school that they are and the pupil admission number. But there are also considerations like the catchments and the boundaries, and a range of different moves we can make. And I think what we're doing in Norfolk is recognising the scale of this change is so significant, and I think it's a national challenge, but Norfolk's one of the areas of the country that perhaps will be most affected given our demographics. We need to take this challenge sort of head on, be proactive about it, and do it together. If we just ask each institution, each school or each multi-academy trust or each part of the system to respond individually, it will be less effective than if all those different parts of the system work together. So what we're trying to do in Norfolk is look at where there are particular challenges in leading on from this decline in pupil numbers, bring the education leaders together in that patch, have a conversation together, share our intelligence, look at the issue from a whole range of angles, and then encourage those education leaders in discussion with the local authority to look at what moves we could make. And so actually, rather than just looking at each school looking at it individually or each trust individually, everybody comes together and says, well, actually, if we merge these two schools, if we reduce the size of this school, if we change the catchment here, putting those ideas together, we can come up with a new configuration which might make some sense for this patch of Norfolk and would be the best possible solution. And then ideally we would then communicate that proposal, if you like, publicly, and then it would obviously then be a sort of second phase process where there would be a public consultation and engagement with that initial proposal that had come out of that professional discussion. So that is the approach we're looking to do, and we've now begun that. But that's new. That hasn't happened in that way before in Norfolk, and I actually do think the Norfolk response to this is more proactive than most authorities. I think actually we're trying to work in the right way and get ahead of the issue, which isn't necessarily what every authority area is doing. But it's new work and it's early days. So I wanted to sort of come here today and share where we're up to and give you sort of early reflections from that. But I do want to be clear, although we've given you some granularity in the paper on the different patches and the different demographics, I can't speak to what the outcome will be in any one patch of Norfolk today for obvious reasons. A, we haven't got as far as that, and B, it would be confidential until the point of reaching a public engagement process. I'll probably stop there, but I hope that was helpful.
Yep. Thank you, James. Just remind the committee, I mean, this is about the overarching approach to how we're looking at dealing with this. It's not about specific individual schools. So please, we don't want a sort of public discussion about where an individual school says, is highlighted, because, as James said, there's a process involved that will, come. And the last thing we want is for hairs to be set running when potentially there may not be a problem and it may be a merger or other pattern. And this is something that we've looked at over a period of years. I mean, I was chair at some point for the small schools working group, but actually some communities, some villages have had quite good growth in terms of new houses built, and the village school by default is thriving and full. The flip side of that, there's areas that aren't earmarked for any development where schools numbers struggle. But I mean, that can sometimes be nothing to do with housing growth. That can be purely down to a good Ofsted report, and parents choose where their children go. So, committee members, any thoughts, comments, questions regarding the report as presented, please? And I've got Ed first on my list.
Thank you, Chair. I've got 3 questions. 2 are kind of fairly specific, and 1 is quite high level. So if I can ask the 2 specific ones together. A number of years ago, when I was involved in the 2 schools in Munsley and the one in Bacton coming together into what at that time was a federation, we were advised very clearly that it made sense to federate rather than to merge, because you had the basic benefit that you kept all of the schools' allocation of cash. So I'm interested to hear a little bit more about if that dynamic has now changed, and if we're talking about mergers or closures, if that kind of if that maths has changed in any way. The other specific question, obviously I'm particularly interested in North Norfolk. The report highlights, and I think it's probably fair to say from my reading of the figures, that North Norfolk is one of the areas that unsurprisingly is most affected by the drop-off in pupil numbers. It references North Walsham, and I'm not going to go into identifying individual schools by any means, but I'm sure you'll be aware, and certainly all the councillors will be aware, that whenever there are building plans put forward in areas, there's a public response around, well, are they going to provide enough schools, et cetera, to meet the need? I know the answer to that, of course, but the concern is often around sequencing. So the specific question is, when you get somewhere like North Walsham, it doesn't have to be North Walsham, but somewhere like North Walsham, where you have a local plan that says we're going to build 2,500 houses, to what extent are you able to kind of factor that into the planning so that you avoid the situation where you might be closing a small village school up the road because the pupil numbers this year are quite low, but the demand might be higher. So there's those two questions, the maths and the extent to which you can integrate the thinking with the future building plans. I've got one other question, but if I can come back to that, that would be great.
James, please.
Yeah, thanks. So taking the sort of first one in turn, no fundamental change to the maths. So as I say, in broad terms, schools working together and indeed coming together to share costs or to integrate structurally in some way is, broadly speaking, a good thing, and one of the ways in which we can make schools more sustainable and stronger, both in terms of their ability to learn from each other and to sort of share best practice and all that sort of thing, but also very much sharing costs and very often, sharing an executive head teacher. But you're still right to say that when it's a difference between 3 schools federating or 3 schools becoming 1 school, as an example, the 3 schools federated will still generate more money, because in a sense, as well, although most of the funding comes per pupil, you do generate funding nationally for just being a school, and therefore 3 separate schools get 3 lots of one-off money as well as the pupils, and so actually it sometimes is the best advice to have it set up in that way. But we would look at it on a very much a case-by-case basis, but there's been no fundamental change to that. I guess on question 2, so when having these discussions and trying to think about what the best solutions would be, we bring a whole range of information into the room. Obviously, pupil projections is core to that, in amongst a range of other factors that I could try and describe if that's helpful. We do factor in what we know about housing growth. So we're not just looking at the numbers today and the birth rate. We are adjusting our projection of pupil numbers according to known areas of housing development as best we can. But as perhaps you can judge, it's not an exact science. If something is well down the line of being a housing development that's reached a sort of later stage of that process, you can very much account for it and bank on it, if you like, and make a projection of how many children that will be generating. Things that are sort of on a long-term strategic plan, which may or may not happen at some point in the next 10 years, aren't as strongly factored in, because we know from bitter experience that you might think there's a whole development coming, but actually it never does, or it comes 5 years after you thought it was going to. So we do try to account for that. I wouldn't say there are many examples in Norfolk where the scale of the housing growth is such that it mitigates the overall position of declining numbers, but where that is the case, it would be part of the discussion in that consideration. So it's definitely factored in.
Yeah, and I mean, it's a specific area with the housing growth adjacent to Kings Lynn. There is a plan for a primary school in that development, but it's 4,000 homes, so it's quite a big one by comparison. Ed, you've got some more questions.
Yeah, just one more really. Obviously, the report says a number of times that the process of sort of conversation features school leaders heavily, and I don't want to cast aspersions against school leaders in particular, because I think this applies to any institution. But I guess if you have a process which has quite small areas, I mean the equivalent, roughly of 2 county divisions, if you're dividing the county into sort of 40, somewhere between 40 and 50 bits. So quite small areas, and heavy engagement with school leaders as the key stakeholders in that. There's a risk that will lead you to a certain set of conclusions, which might not be the same conclusions if you were doing it in a different way. And I guess the question, because fundamentally people will want to protect their own institutions, I guess the question is, what scope have you got for doing things that are radically different? How much are your hands tied by, say, the law, national picture, those kinds of things, around saying, well, we could manage this change in demand by, say, for example, going to, as they have in lots of European countries, a kind of shift system for schools, so that some pupils come in early and go home early, others come in later and go home later. So those kind of very much blue sky type of thinking and approaches. Have you got the scope to do that within within the powers that you have?
Okay, quite a few different bits to that. So I think in terms of the process and the sort of, is it only education leaders that get to have a view? Initially, yes, but I would want to come back to the point about there's a sort of, if you like, there's a professional discussion, then there's a public consultation. So in terms of other voices being heard, there absolutely is a sort of phase there where that can come in, and it would absolutely be the case that having heard the feedback from the community, it would then go back into a process before we sort of came to a final recommended position. I want to stress that the local authority is not the final decision maker in all of these cases. Obviously depends on whether it's an academy school or an authority maintained school. So in that sense, it's not even up to the LA in every case what the final outcome is, even after the consultation. But we're trying to sort of bring those groups together, and I would trust from the engagement so far that whoever is the responsible body will take the feedback of the community really seriously, as well as listening to voices around that table. And I am pleased so far that you've got people coming to the table not only considering their interests, the tone of conversation so far has included the buy-in of all the different bits of the education system, but people are thinking a bit, well, actually, of course, I'm primarily interested in the schools that belong to my academy trust, for example, but actually I'm interested in the health of the education system in Norfolk, and I'm going to enter in a dialogue and compromise a bit. So we are having that sort of dialogue in that way. Blue sky thinking, if I'm honest, isn't the nature of the conversation in the room at this point in time. Most of the rules of this game are set out at national policy level. So in terms of wiggle room to do things that are entirely radical, I wouldn't say we've got that isn't the nature of the conversation. It's a more pragmatic conversation about which combination of structural integration, changes to catchment, changes to pupil admission numbers, sharing of leadership costs is the best combo we can come up with for this patch. We're not coming up with miracle solutions that manage the problem away. It's just deciding which of the moves to make is the best one. And I think critically, trying to make it as orderly as possible. It's always going to be tough to talk about closing a school or merging or amalgamating a school, which actually happens rather than straightforwardly a closure. But if that is done in a planned way, it's done in collaboration with the other schools in the patch in good time, the disruption to the community is much less than what sometimes you see happening is a school reaching a tipping point where suddenly a couple of families move just because they choose to move, and it tips the school over into, oh, actually the numbers suddenly getting really small. Other parents start to think, actually, this is only going one way, I'm going to move my children, and it can go in a week from seeming quite sustainable to not being sustainable, and then everybody has to react in a bit of a on the back foot kind of a way, and that's significantly more disruptive and leads to a process of change that is harder, but also not necessarily the right schools making the move, whereas we would hope that through this you get to a planned and structured approach. But I don't want to give you the view that we are doing blue sky thinking which comes up with something that mitigates that. The reality is that the output will be some proposals to make some schools smaller, bring some together, change some boundaries, share leadership costs and merge and amalgamate. That is what the proposals will be.
And presumably governors and trustees will realise that that's the case. I mean, if there's not enough pupils to fill the role, they have to look at that as part of their governance process.
Yes, I mean, I think we've been trying very deliberately, including in meetings like this today, to get this message out there that everyone should be thinking about this. So although we're organising these meetings, bringing people together, I would also hope that every governing body, every group of trustees is talking to their head teacher, their executive head, their CEO about this issue anyway, because we can't shy away from it, and they will therefore realise that this is no one's fault. This is not the local authority or any other person imposing a negative solution. It's actually just the reality of the numbers. So I think that we're quite deliberately quite keen to keep making the point that we can't bury our heads in the sand about this and get that out there. So I think that's the approach we're taking.
Right, I've got Maxine, I've got Philip, and then I've got Richard. So Maxine, Councillor Webb first.
Thank you. I've got 3 points here. First of all, sort of the timeline. You mentioned, you said sort of a third or less children in 10 years' time, I think is what you said. So are we talking about when sort of the crunch decision is around sort of merging, closing, whatever? When is that actually likely to happen? And leading up to that process, you said it's sort of started now, meetings have started now. On one very specific question on page 81, where you've talked about, in the final bullet point under 3.1, closed schools, which could include closed schools which have significant sustainability issues in the following areas: pupil numbers, financial viability, staffing, education, outcomes. Is that where a school has got issues in all of those, or in one of those, you know, that you're sort of focusing on, or does it have to be all of them? That's specific. And just around local first inclusion and all of the work that's going on there, SRBs, that kind of thing, where how that work and how the impact of what you're doing there is likely to be affected by some of, you know, what's going on here. I know it must be really complicated, but are you, you know, where there's work already, especially if it's sort of significant work that's taken place, and how that is impacted, and also even like in terms of transport, if we're changing around schools and locations.
Yeah, thanks. Happy to take those in turn. So, in terms of the time scale, in some ways the graph that's at 1.3 might give you a bit of a sense of it. That just shows you the overall numbers declining over the years. But you can see that if you look at the primary phase, there's already a bit of a gap between what's called the PAN total, so the total number of places being offered by primary schools, and the size of the cohort. And you can sort of see from the graph the number of years. Each year group that comes through is smaller than the previous one, and therefore the size of that gap becomes really material. It's already getting to be quite a big issue in the primary sector. It'll be hitting the secondary sector in 4 or 5 years in a bigger way. So when I said 10 years, I would probably say it's a 10-year process to see it fully play out, but I would say the issue is now. We're having the first discussions in a few of the patches, so that you might hear the first proposed solutions in a few bits of Norfolk relatively early in the new year, but that will only be in a few bits of Norfolk, and it will be a rolling programme. We're working our way through a list according to priority of where the issue would appear to be most acute. But I would say that we may need to change, you know, if suddenly something changes in a patch we weren't looking at, we'll have to react quite quickly and have that discussion in a more rapid way. But if that gives you a bit of a sense of it, we're working on it now, early next year, but it'll be ongoing for years, I think, if that's helpful. On the bit of the criterion, so it's probably worth saying that. So no, it's not the case that you have to hit all of the boxes to be considered. But I want to be really clear that we're not actually just going into the meeting and saying, let's leave these 6 schools alone because they don't hit the criterion and discuss that one. What we're actually discussing is all of the schools in a patch, regardless of whether they have been hitting any of those different criterion, because actually you need to see the total number of places in an area, and there's actually quite a long list of things we're factoring in here. So you've got, yes, there's the pupil numbers, the state of the building, the SEND provision, which maybe does or doesn't exist at a particular school. Sometimes there's an early years impact. You've got home to school transport, you've got the Ofsted rating, you've got the attainment picture of that school, you've got parental preference, and so the list goes on. And so we are trying to bring information about all of those things into that room and discuss in all of that context, where do we need to make a move? So in some ways, it is about sustainability. But as an example, the geography is a really big problem. So you might have a school that's got tiny numbers and actually is really struggling financially, and maybe even the outcomes aren't that good for children in terms of educational attainment. But in reality, if it's the only school for miles around, you might still say, actually, we need to try to keep that one protected, because otherwise you've got a sort of desert in a bit of Norfolk with no provision in it at all. So it might seem to the community a little bit perverse sometimes. I think, well, why on earth would it be that this one that has got quite good numbers on roll is proposing to halve its size, but that one that looks tiny and it appears to be struggling? But actually that's the reason. So this is very much about compromise. It's about best fit. We've done a policy statement that tries to give some steer to that, but we've been really careful not to have any hard and fast rules that says, if this, always this, for exactly that reason. In a place like Norfolk, you can't say there's an absolute size of pupil numbers that you can't go below, because actually in some cases you may have to. So it is very much about compromise. And I've given that steer actually to my own team as well, to say everybody's going to have to compromise here, including the LA. We might have a sort of idealised view of what our plan would be, but we're only one stakeholder in a system. And so actually everybody has to sort of try and come together. So it kind of works in that way, which hopefully gives you some reassurance that it isn't just a sort of tick box kind of thing. Did I miss one part of your question?
Yeah, LFI.
Yeah, LFI. So, I mean, yeah, as I say, one of the things we are thinking about already is which of the schools in a patch have specialist SEND provision attached to them or is planned to be billed. Again, doesn't necessarily mean that that's an automatic sort of, that school's always protected, but of course that would be a consideration, and you're trying to make sure that you're not undermining SEND sufficiency by addressing the school place planning consideration. We're obviously also thinking a little bit about where there is a school closure or merging, that's a building that's come free. In some cases, that might be a building you could redevelop for a different purpose, but only where that would make sense. So it's very much in the mix. But again, I wouldn't want to say that it's always the thing that trumps everything else, because you're weighing all these different considerations.
It certainly is a complex picture. I think I've got Philip next, please.
In fact, you've answered most of the, I think Ed and particularly Maxine brought up most of the points I was going to make, but I do read that you do work, obviously, with, councils, district councils doing local plans, etc. But one of the, and I presume, but one of the things I've noticed over the years is on planning applications from, let's say for a care home, adult will actually sometimes say, there's a shortage of, adult spaces in your town, so you need more adults. I've never actually seen, and normally when you get a reply from the education, it's how much money they want from the 106 agreement, to be honest. Well, I've never seen actually ever one saying, well, actually, this development would be good for education because we are a bit short of, or we're getting short of pupils in this area. And I was just wondering whether that's a possibility, or would it sort of set off too many hairs to actually say that, because people then say, oh, God, this school's going to close down. But quite often, we have, Breckland have something called service centre villages, which one of the criteria is that they should have a school. But and often those villagers don't want any further development. But if they knew that perhaps their school might be under pressure, if they didn't have more development, that might be information which really should be given to them.
Yeah, thank you. I think that's a really good point. I'm conscious that I'm going beyond my briefs. I'm not going to try and reset county council planning policy. But I would say we need more children in Norfolk for the good of Norfolk and its long-term economic viability and vibrancy and everything else. We do need more children. So anything that we can do as an authority to have a policy framework that encourages more children to either be born or to move. We need more families having more children, or obviously moving in, whether it's the birth rate. And there's a real long-term issue for Norfolk. If the current trend, I can see a few years into the future in terms of school place planning based on the current birth rate. If that continues to fall off, there is a self-fulfilling prophecy here where if families can't see education provision of a quality and of a range, they're not going to move out of London in a way they might have done previously, and then the situation becomes worse and worse and worse, and it becomes a process of managed decline, really. So I would say, from my personal point of view as a director in Children's Services, that I'd want to be advocating for the point you're making, absolutely, that sometimes a housing development, particularly if it's one that's going to attract young families, rather than people buying a second home or whatever else, would be to the good of Norfolk, and that's a good point, well made. I wouldn't want to say it trumps all other considerations in planning.
I must admit, I've seen firsthand a village which was earmarked for 20 houses that's had over 200 planning permissions granted, and the school is full. But I mean, had they not have come, it certainly wouldn't have been. So it does, and the village is thriving as a result of the new development, where it was in decline before. So it does make a difference. So Philip, you're absolutely right on the point that you raised. I think next I've got Richard, please.
Thank you, Chair. I'd like, if I may, just to share an observation over the process that James had described that might be helpful for councillors, but then also just a point of reassurance, much of which actually you've given during the questions and answers. So with 105 church schools across the diocese, you can imagine we've been very pleased to be involved in this process. And I myself have attended a number of them. And I want to thank you, James, for the way in which you facilitated those conversations. And having been a head teacher and a chief executive of Multi Academy Trust and now working for the diocese, I remember the feeling that Ed referred to about, heads almost fighting for their schools and making it very difficult to have any collaborative discussions. So the environment that James and his team have created, I think, is the most appropriate for meeting what is a really complex landscape now. And I'd just like to remind councillors of the way in which that landscape has changed over the last 10 years due to conversions to academies and multi-academy trusts. So it has fragmented what was a fairly straightforward arrangement, and it would have been a lot easier doing this process 10 years ago when you didn't have multi-academy trust crossing boundaries and running schools adjacent to each other. So having been at those meetings, I've seen and felt that positive engagement. It has been collaborative. Clearly, it doesn't produce solutions, at the end of 2 hours. We don't all walk out and realise we've solved everything. But I think engaging stakeholders in that way is exactly the right way to go about it. And my point of, or question about reassurance has been mainly covered so far. But I suppose what I was thinking was to ensure that the process that leads to proposals and ultimately decisions does include that wide breadth of criteria. This is not simply an exercise carried out on numerical data that says we'll close this school, we'll leave that one open, or we'll merge, or we'll do whatever. And with representing the diocese, for example, we're really keen that for those parents who actively choose to go to a Church of England school, that they should be able to. And I appreciate that's one element in a wide range of criteria, but the point I want to make is that the process used is broad and deep and includes all elements that parents find important, not least quality of education, but for their children. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Richard. That's very helpful insight, James.
Yeah, thank you for that feedback. That's really great to hear. And and to your question, I think I'd want to give that reassurance that we are looking at this from sort of lots and lots of different angles, as I've described. And because what we're trying to achieve is some degree of consensus. So we're not approaching these meetings with the LA coming in and saying we worked out in advance what we think the answer is. Do you agree? Because actually that doesn't lead to the right spirit and wouldn't always be the right thing, because there's often a lot of intelligence and insight and data in the room that adds to our perspective. So but everybody sharing their point of view and then sharing their intel starts to get us to, well, okay, there could be a number of options here which might start to emerge, and then we can, as sort of brokers of that, shape it up into a more firm list of, well, maybe this, and this, and then it comes back into the room. So what we're trying to achieve is a world in which all the people around that table have discussed it in the round, had a number of different propositions to react to, and have come to either a full consensus or at least a best fit consensus with that. And I think that's also quite important for the public. So when we get to the point of saying this is what we think the outcome is, I think it will be reassuring and helpful if the public see all the public servants and ideally wider stakeholders saying, we all came together, we all discussed it, we know there's some tough decisions in this space, but we all think this is the best thing that we can do, rather than everybody fighting their own corner or seeking to blame somebody else. And there is a real risk of that given the situation. So I think the way we're trying to approach it gives us the best chance of sort of holding the system together. And I actually do think by doing something really hard together, we're actually strengthening some of the relationships between education bodies that wouldn't previously have worked together. So we may come out of it with some positive relationships forged, whereas if we just let it happen, I think it can be quite a divisive issue. So that's the spirit in which we're going into it.
Thanks, James. I've got Helen wanting to come in, and then I'll come to John for a final word.
Thank you, Chair. Just echo our Church of England diocese colleagues, and also from the Catholic side of things as well. I know we've only got 4 schools in Norfolk, but if I could just make a plea that you involve us in those discussions rather than just the trust that is currently within covering those 4 schools. It's the diocese that has the responsibility for sufficiency of Catholic places. Thank you.
Yeah, happy to provide that reassurance that we are working in that way where the reps of the individual trusts and the diocese associated is both part of the dialogue. And it's a word, I guess, on faith schools. You know, the county council can't have a policy statement that's sort of formally pro or has a certain view on faith schools, as you can perhaps imagine. But it's part of the dialogue in the room. And one of the things we're going to have to wrestle with is we may end up in a world in which some parts of Norfolk have little or no faith-based education for those who would like it, or the only school for miles around happens to be a church one, and therefore families that wouldn't want to have that as their choice don't have as much option. And I'm afraid that's just also part of the reality of this, given the numbers. So I wanted to just be transparent about that. It's in the dialogue, but it's just one of many factors, and sadly there'll be, I guess, fewer options for people in certain circumstances.
Thank you. Final word to John.
Thanks, Chairman. Yeah, really, a lot of what has now been said actually by Richard and James again. I fully endorse, and I'm certain the committee does, the approach. It is the right one. The earlier you engage with the people involved, the parents, the schools, then the easier it is to get an agreement at the end, and while the process is open and accountable, and everyone can see that everyone is trying to get a satisfactory agreed solution, then I just wish you luck. It's not going it's not going to be easy, but the approach you're taking, I'm certain, will be more successful than had we gone in hardball and we're going to do this, that, and the other. We have to take the public and the schools along with us. So yeah, well done, and we await the outcome.
Yeah, thank you. That's really kind. I mean, I think this is going to be really hard. I'm conscious that right now we're in the phase where the theory sounds quite good. As soon as it moves into the mode of us actually proposing something in the first couple of patches, it will quickly become more difficult, and there'll definitely be reactions in communities. Sadly, if your village school is one of the ones that's proposed for an amalgamation, that will cause some upset, and I don't think we can sort of shy away from that. I guess I'm hoping that the spirit in which it's being done will come across, and that stakeholders more widely will understand that there is obviously an intent to, having come up with a sort of proposed view, if you like, as professionals, we need to be careful to try to make sure that all the directly affected stakeholders, so governing bodies and local members, etc., get to know before it goes public, and then it's still open to, but that will have to be quite a rapid process and done with the ask of confidentiality, and then hopefully it can be announced in a sort of managed way. And as I say, it's really important to understand that public consultation phase is a genuine consultation that might change the outcome in some cases. So we'll hopefully get, as professionals, to a really good proposal that makes some sense. But it is possible that through the public consultation phase, when others weigh in, we'll come to a different view. So I want to be really clear about that it isn't a done deal after these meetings until that second phase has occurred.
So, committee, we're asked to consider this report, which I believe we've done, and indicate any further actions or recommendations. And I just echo the words from John. I mean, I think the approach that's being taken is the right one. Is there any further recommendations we wish to make, or support carrying on the process as outlined? All happy? Yep. Indeed. So thank you very much. And that moves us on finally to page 98 of the agenda, which is our work programme. We'll come to Tristan talk about that, please?
Thank you, Chair, and I'm conscious this has been a long meeting, and I'll be as brief as I possibly can be. The first thing was for me to thank members for their continued engagement with the work programming under the new system. I think that's shown in the resulting rich discussions we've had and the reports that have come to this committee, so a thank you for that. If I can take the two actions backward, I'll take the two items that are sort of noting first, just to say that following a review at Strategic and Corporate Select Committee on the 22nd of October, policy framework items are being provided to all of the select committees at the Council, and it's to note that the two items that are highlighted in blue on that Appendix C belong to this committee, and it's really just for information at this stage and to determine in the future work programming when things might need to come for a review. That's number 3 first. Number 2 is just to note the working groups that report to the Select Committee. There's just the adult learning one, in addition to some of those corporate parenting groups. And there's no changes necessarily required there. It's just to make members aware of these groups under the new governance arrangements, given the change to the committee system. Finally, I'll come to Appendix A, as I say, going sort of back to front. And just looking ahead at the work programme that's on page 102, Appendix C. Obviously, we've got quite a busy looking meeting for January, and I understand from discussing to officers just before this, there is scope or even perhaps a desire to move some of those items based on items coming down the line and work that's ongoing. So it was to say, if we could look at January, have a discussion about what committee would like to prioritise. I understand that the education policy refresh item could potentially move to a March meeting, and we could provide perhaps a better report. And also to say that the music hub, I understand that could also move to the March meeting, and perhaps that could also be carried out as an all-member briefing if committee thought that was appropriate, if this is something that all members might be interested in beyond the scope of just this committee. So that's it from me. Sorry for the spiel, but over to members to comment and prioritise. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. Yes, I was aware that the Norfolk and Suffolk Music Hub item could well move to March. I'm also minded that as a committee we've got a forward work programme that includes lots of children's service elements, but not very much in terms of where we're at with libraries and museums. We've got two very big library build schemes in Great Yarmouth and one getting towards completion in Kings Lynn, and I think somewhere in our forward work programme, it would be good to know, A, how they've gone, a sort of project evaluation, and what they're looking to provide. And also in terms of the museum service, John, you had some thoughts on the museum.
Yeah, I think looking at the budget, and this actually was mentioned to me by Councillor Ward, who should have been on this committee today but couldn't turn up, but obviously has chaired the Museums Committee for a number of years. And he, and I agree, would like a paper to come forward to the committee regarding museum budgets and staffing and possible ways of looking at staffing, whether we should be looking at engaging volunteers and this sort of thing, but generally a paper on the operation of the museums. We have 10 of them in Norfolk, and certainly with discussion with John, who I regard as Mr. Museums, he has visited a number of times many of our museums and feels that maybe there should be a paper come that some of the smaller ones possibly could operate with voluntary staff, which may give a budget saving, but it may also provide more interest from groups across Norfolk if they were involved more. Just a suggestion.
Thank you. If I could just quickly come back on that, Councillor Fisher. So, as we'll see in the work programme, there are the pipeline items, and we did have items held for museums and indeed those library hubs that Councillor Long's mentioned. And I'm conscious that that was something that came up in the meeting earlier. So, absolutely happy for those to go on. I suppose it's just a question over committee of what we can prioritise for the next two meetings that we've got scheduled to fit those in. So
Put that on. We'll try and achieve those items moving from the pipeline to being in the programme. Councillor Maxfield and then Councillor Webb. I noticed.
Yeah, thank you. A couple of things. First of all, very much echo the sense of value in looking at museums. I'm aware as a former member of the Museums Committee that the Museum Service adopted a new strategy at some point last year. I'm not exactly sure when. So it might be worth talking to them about when would be a good date that would make a sensible date to review progress against those strategic objectives in that. With the Music Hub, I mean, I would be happy for it to be an all-member briefing, but I guess the questions that I would be looking to ask them if we were examining it in committee, is around their support for children with SEND. So if it turns into an all-member briefing, it would be good to have that reported back to them as something that would be good to include. And the only other point I was going to make was in terms of the education strategy. I recall, I think it was James actually making a plea when we looked at it initially to say, please don't expect everything in this strategy to be achieved within 6 months. So if that needed to be pushed back a little bit, you'd have my support on that, particularly since presumably there will come a phase, well, possibly, I suppose it depends what the outcome of LGR is, but if, depending on the outcome of LGR, there will be a process of saying, right, how do we unpick this and move it into the new structure?
Yeah, absolutely. We'll need that. Once we know what government are thinking, we'll definitely need that on the agenda to know where things either are staying or going. Absolutely so.
It's really helpful. Can I just check that's got consensus view as well for moving that?
I think that yeah, we need to think that. And Councillor Webb, please, Maxine.
Thank you. Yeah, I've just got a couple of extra points, if that's okay. Just around the January meeting and the item on home education, can we ask for that to include education other than at school? Can we have information on that as well as part of that report, because they kind of sit quite close together?
We can, though that would substantially complicate it. So it's just because there's lots of that phrase means lots and lots of different things, and so if you wanted a sort of overview of all forms of alternative education, all different ways in which children are unusually educated, then actually that would be a much longer and more complicated report than just something on elective home education. So it's perhaps a question whether you want a deep dive really on home education, or whether you want something broader that covers the rest of it. But that could easily be 100 pages if I tried to cover all the bits in some depth.
I think your request has some merit, Councillor Webb. What we'll do is behind the scenes, we'll have a look at that. Obviously, we've got January's meeting. Won't be far away in the scheme of things. But if we can get something for then, if not, it may be something that comes as a sort of follow-on to that broader report. Yeah, I mean, with some of the specifics.
I guess my only other thought is that the Local First Inclusion Programme includes alternative provision, which covers quite a big chunk of it. So if it was helpful to make the Local First Inclusion report have a particular focus on the alternative provision bit of it, that would pick up quite a lot of what you might be picking at, rather than having sort of two different reports doing the same thing. But I'll happily be steered, but I just wanted to be clear it is quite a broad scope when we say. Yeah.
We have a discussion
we'll
about
have a discussion
that.
And see what we can.
Can I? Sorry, the other thing. Thank you. The other thing was two other things. The foster carers and adoption, which is in March, it's a bit more time. I just wanted to ask that we have the voice of families in that report, because it says look at the wider role of the council in helping the uptake of fostering and adoption. I think it would be really helpful if we had some work from, some feedback from the foster carers and adoptive families, so that we know we're getting things right, and to make sure that the support that the work that is going on, I mean, it may already be part of the plan, but I just wanted to highlight that, because I think it's really important to make sure we're doing it right.
Important voices to hear in all of that. Can that be added to, James? Thank you. Yeah.
And my last thing, so given that the SEND reforms have been pushed back and so on, and the importance of it, all of that work to the council, it's about asking for whether we have a later item. I know we've got local first inclusion as sort of a rolling, is it every other committee or every other committee? But can we have a review after the reform's been published, a review of Norfolk's sort of ongoing SEND strategy on the forward work plan, so that, you know, our reaction to the reform, so that we can see what, you know, if we are adjusting our plan, or what happens, what comes next.
Yes, of course. I mean, to be clear, once the reforms come out, there will be an enormous process of reviewing all of our strategy in light of it, and I think actually we'll be requested to formally resubmit a new plan to government at a certain point in time. So that would happen anyway. So absolutely, yeah.
I think that's something that not only this committee will be an interest in, I think every councillor will be interested in exactly what that'll mean and into how we work, because it will affect what's happening right across the county, not just the people who are on the select committee. So we'll have to find a way that an all-member briefing can be had once we can see what the government are wishing to do. And I think final word to Dan, Councillor Roper.
Thank you, Chairman. It's about the item from March on fostering and adoption, and I was happily substituting. I think it was in June when we did the work programming session, and I raised this in the meeting at the beginning of it as well. And the drive for that item was about the significant changes and upheavals that had happened in the service quite recently at that point, which hadn't had any member oversight at that stage, and the importance of that having some member oversight and bringing a report to committee. And alongside that, an item around promoting foster carers and adoption. Now, it seems the first part of that has been missed out of this particular item, and I spoke to Councillor Bambridge about this before the meeting started, which is a bit disappointing. I think that both elements should certainly be included when some member oversight on this service takes place. Thank you.
Between Tristan, James and the committee, Councillor Bambridge, you...
Thank you, Chairman. We've been told this morning that there's a report coming to Cabinet about fostering, so it needs to link in with that, really, doesn't it? Right.
Thank you. I can take that. Oh, sorry, James, do you want?
Well, just so to be clear, the report coming to Cabinet, I think it is just being finalised, but that's on a different topic. That's more about proposed enhancements to the service and further investment and the idea of sort of further wraparound support around foster carers rather than the changes that I think Councillor Roper's referencing. So that won't, I don't think, be covered in the Cabinet paper. That's not to say what you want to talk about can't be brought here.
I think there's a connection to part of what we want to bring forward, because it's not just, it's about recruitment and everything else, which presumably the Cabinet paper is, isn't it? So it's a bit of everything, isn't it?
Yeah, with limited agenda time, I mean, it's important that item isn't forgotten and we do get a full list of reports on it. The fact that Cabinet are looking at it, let's see what Cabinet do, and let's do some, instead of doing pre-scrutiny of what they do, let's do post-scrutiny of what they deal and come up with on that one, and we'll try and bring that to an item after they've had the Cabinet report and after Cabinet have deliberated. We are rapidly running out of time for this Council's term. Our next meeting, to note please, is January the 16th, so Happy New Year to everyone. And our last scheduled meeting is for the 13th of March. So again, we've already got fairly full agendas for those two meetings, and it's often difficult to try and fit another one in, but we'll definitely be minded of what happens with that Cabinet report, and if necessary, look to make sure something's fitted in for that March meeting as a backstop. Okay. And with that all, thank you very much everyone for your indulgence. Meeting closed.